Alrighty, Rooney, welcome back. Oh boy, I've got messages today. To another thrilling installment of whatever the title of this week's stream is. Free Read Fridays. There we go. It's been a long week. Um, oh, thank you for tuning in, Otters all the way. I've been able to join you on Twitch because I mostly find you on YouTube. Not long ago, read Hyperion and Endymion. Nice. I think you'd love the Quantum Thief trilogy, like Dan Simmons. It's a solar system post-human affair. I know I've heard of the Quantum Thief series. I have not read any of them so far as I know. I will definitely look into them now. Not this second, but I will find time. I'm looking forward to your upcoming E&M Banks season. I rate you above even many professional audiobook narrators. I will take that. Schismatrix by Bruce Sterling, more post-human stuff, a very good choice. That one's quite good. Bruce Sterling's quite good in general. That one I have read. That one's very good. If you like post-humanism, I definitely recommend checking out some of Gregg Egan's work. I would push you towards anything that deals with the amalgam, which is through his short stories mostly, but also through what is it called? I'm looking at it. I'm squinting so hard. Uh, Incandescence, I know for a fact. Um, actually, Zendegi as well, but that's like could happen tomorrow, sort of. But what's the other one? Shill's Ladder, kind of. And I can't remember if it's Terranesia or Distress. 'Cause I get some of his earlier novels confused in my head. For Gregg Egan's post-humanism stuff, I do recommend checking out the short story collections Luminous and Oceanic, as well as I think Instantiation. I still have to get around to reading Sleep and the Soul, another short story collection by him, as well as the Book of All Skies. I just, within the last month or so, finished Phoresis, which is like 4 short novellas, and all of them were good. Every single one. Ditto Watts, very nice, excellent. I'm glad you've checked them out. But yeah, I stream to both YouTube and Twitch in I guess in a bid to get more viewership, but not with the intention of making money. Again, like I've harped on before, making money off this venture was pretty much a foregone conclusion, although I am getting a Patreon set up, so if people want to throw money my way, they can. I don't know what they would want for it. That's kind of the problem. Is I'm like, what would I pay for it? I'm like, well, I don't really throw much money around to streamers, so I don't actually know. If you have suggestions on that, I'll definitely throw it out there. I will take it into account at the very least. So, previously on, we read The Detective's Tale in Hyperion, which is Braun Lamia's backstory, the long goodbye, har har har. Let's see, Braun Lamia, where's a online anagram finder? Anagram generator, there we go. Let's try Braun Lamia. Wow, it's downloading a... Let's find Marlowe. It doesn't even have Marlowe. I suppose because there's no O. But it's the same vowel sound as Marlowe. Braun Lamia. So it counts. She is, I'm fairly certain, a reference to Marlowe from the story, the detective novel, The Long Goodbye, which by I went through this brief detective noir phase, and where I just read a couple of the big names from like the 50s and 60s, and I can't remember any of them anymore. the novel. Chandler, Raymond Chandler. And there's a protagonist called Philip Marlowe. And I think she's intended to be a nod. It doesn't technically work out because it doesn't have an O in the name, but everything else works. Anyway, so we got her backstory, and what a backstory it is. We've learned many things now. Oh gosh. We've learned about, let's see, oh yeah, the AIs. We've learned a lot about them. The Technocore, and how we've learned a little bit about how they just kind of ditched humanity at a certain point. We've learned more about how and why they did that. It turns out they are not a unified front by any stretch of the imagination. They are, in fact, very much diametrically opposed to each other in many ways. They do not all get along. Um, let's see. You've got the volatiles, who basically are like, humans are a problem, and they cause too many problems, so we should probably get rid of them. We don't really need them. You've got the stables, which are kind of the opposite. They're like, well, humans aren't perfect, but they did make us, and it really doesn't harm us much to interact with them and, basically keep their society running for them. And then you have a third faction whose name I have just forgotten because my brain is small. Or my memory is short anyway. I think they're the Ultimates. And they are focused on one goal and one goal only, and that is to make God. And or become God. And or basically it's a Godhead thing. They very much want Godhead. That is a big driver for them. So so they're kind of acting as like a middle influence between those two opposed factions, and the Ultimates will only really their only goal is to bring about the Godhead in one way or another, theoretically an AI Godhead, and basically whatever goal or whichever faction is pushing more towards that, they're going to back whatever they see. So historically, they've been more or less aligned with the stables because they felt that they needed humans to accomplish that. And right now, they're leaning the other way. So humanity's future is in somewhat dire straits. We also learned that they've had communications with the Ousters, who have, until this point in time, and going forward, are basically mankind's biggest boogeyman, or at least the Hedgera's hegemony's biggest boogeyman. They're basically human beings who migrated outwards and just kind of do their own thing. They're not part of human civilization as a whole, and and the hegemony's interactions with them have been destructive. They've not been great. More on that later. We will learn that that is not necessarily what we think it is. There are many layers to that and reasons for what's going on. Where are you? I'm trying to find the section where it talked about the factions of AI-dom. Is it really that close to the end of that bit? Maybe it was. No, it was definitely before this. Oh, wait, no. It is after this. It is that close. Yikes. Where are we? Yes, the Ultimates. It's the stables, the volatiles, and the Ultimates. Stables basically are like, they're usually older, so they would be Tay AI if it evolved a little bit, and then some, as well as more modern ones. They are the stables argue that a certain level of symbiosis is necessary between humanity and the core. They've promoted the Ultimate Intelligence Project as a way to avoid rash decisions and delay until all variables can be factored. The volatiles are the force behind the secession 3 centuries ago. The volatiles have done conclusive studies that show how humankind's usefulness is past, and from this point on, human beings constitute a threat to the core. They advocate immediate and total extinction. And then between the stables and the volatiles are the ultimates. For the past 5 centuries, the ultimates have been so all the AIs basically are trying to create the ultimate intelligence, the godhead, um, super AI that'll control space, time, and be omnipotent and all that fun jazz that has never ever gone wrong, horribly wrong before. Between the stables and the volatiles are the ultimates. For the past 5 centuries, the ultimates have been obsessed with the UI project. The existence or extinction of the human race is of interest to them only in how it applies to that project. To this date, they have been a force for moderation, an ally of the stables, because it is their perception that such reconstruction and retrieval projects as the Old Earth experiment are necessary to the culmination of the UI. Oh yeah, um, Earth wasn't destroyed by a black hole in its core that we accidentally popped in there. The AIs vanished it away. So it's fine. Probably. Maybe. We think. There's something very much like Earth floating around closer to the core of the galaxy, and the AIs made it. And they use it to run simulations. Because of course they do. If you're getting any Douglas Adams deep thought vibes, you're not alone. So now we move on to the thrilling climax. And this is going to include it all. This is going to have a character story. This is going to have a prelude, an interlude, and an epilogue. Um, and then next week we'll get rocking on the immediate follow-up, the Fall of Hyperion. I am probably not going to do Endymion until much later this year, if I do. This year, I will get around to doing the Endymion duology at some point. I will promise that against my better judgment because I can't leave y'all hanging. You may not be happy with the result. I know Endymion has often been seen as rather divisive. I happen to like it, but there are parts where I sort of cock an eyebrow. I'm like, oh, okay. But it's still a worthwhile exercise. I will do some Ian M. Banks this year. I've committed to that. Um, what I'm probably going to be doing for Wednesdays, and I realize this is all preamble, it's taking way too long, and I should be saving it till after the fact. Um, I'm probably going to do starting next Wednesday, provided no emergencies crop up, which they shouldn't. Is I'll be reading a Cory Doctorow short story collection called Radicalized because it's entertaining and good. It is chicken soup for the soul in these trying times. It's not so much that it's feel good, it kind of is. And that's sort of one of the things I like and have a complaint about with Cory Doctorow is he's a tad optimistic for my for my general taste. Not that I'm a diehard cynic, but sometimes it's like, well, that's a little pat, don't you think? But he is absolutely with it, and he knows, he gets it, like he gets it. And you'll know what I mean when we get there. All right, so oh yeah, and Hetmastine is has disappeared. I think we covered that last time. No, that was the time before. So we already knew that. Oh yeah, and Braun Lamy is pregnant with a cybrid AI human-shaped objects baby. So there's that too. Forgot about that. Yep. Okay, let's get cracking. Chapter 6. Kronos Keep jutted from the easternmost rim of the great bridal range, a grim Baroque heap of sweating stones with 300 rooms and halls, a maze of lightless corridors leading to deep halls, towers, turrets, balconies overlooking the northern moors, air shafts rising half a kilometer to light. What? Oh, yes. Air shafts rising half a kilometer to light and rumored to drop to the world's labyrinth itself. Parapets scoured by cold winds from the peaks above. Stairways, inside and out, carved from the mountain stone and leading nowhere. Stained glass windows 100 meters tall, set to catch the first rays of solstice sun or the moon on midwinter night. Painless windows the size of a man's fist, looking out on nothing in particular, an endless array of bas-relief, grotesque gargoyle sculptures in half-hidden niches. Oh, wait, no. Grotesque sculptures in half-hidden niches, and more than 1,000 gargoyles staring down from eave and parapet, transept and sepulchre, peering down through wood rafters in the great halls, positioned so as to peer in the blood-tinted windows on the northeast face, their winged and hunchbacked shadows moving like grim sundial hours, cast by sunlight in the day and gas-fed torches at night. I'm going to read this entire paragraph over again, because it is a very long paragraph, and it sets the mood. And I have mangled it so far. I am sorry. So we're taking that from the top. My bad. Kronos Keep jutted from the easternmost rim of the great bridal range, a grim Baroque heap of sweating stones with 300 rooms and halls, a maze of lightless corridors leading to deep halls, towers, turrets, balconies overlooking the northern moors. Air shafts rising half a kilometer to light, and rumored to drop to the world's labyrinth itself. Parapets scoured by cold winds from the peaks above. Stairways, inside and out, carved from the mountain stone and leading nowhere. Stained glass windows 100 meters tall, set to catch the first rays of solstice sun or the moon on midwinter night. Paneless windows the size of a man's fist, looking out on nothing in particular. An endless array of bas-relief, grotesque sculptures in half-hidden niches. And more than 1,000 gargoyles staring down from eave and parapet, transept and sepulchre. Sepulchre! Believe that is not a hard CH, but a soft C, or it's not a TCH, but a, I haven't heard sepulchre pronounced out loud maybe ever, so my bad. Peering down through wood rafters in the great halls, and positioned so as to peer in the blood-tinted windows of the northeast face, their winged and hunchbacked shadows moving like grim sundial hours, cast by sunlight in the day and gas-fed torches at night. And everywhere in Kronos Keep, signs of the Shrike Church's long occupation. Atonement altars draped in red velvet, hanging and freestanding sculptures of the Avatar with polychrome steel for blades. Sorry, skipped back a line. Polychrome steel for blades and blood gems for eyes. More statues of the Shrike carved from the stone of narrow stairways and dark halls, so that nowhere in the night would one be free of the fear of touching hands emerging from rock, the sharp curve of blade descending from stone, 4 arms enveloping in a final embrace. As if in a last measure of ornamentation, a filigree of blood in many of the once occupied halls and rooms, arabesques of red spattered in almost recognizable patterns along walls and tunnel ceilings, bedclothes caked hard with rust-red substance. And a central dining hall filled with the stench of food rotting from a meal abandoned weeks earlier. The floor and table, chairs and wall, adorned with blood, stained clothing and shredded robes lying in mute heaps. And everywhere the sound of flies.
Jolly fucking place, isn't it? Said Martin Silenus, his voice echoing. Father Hoyt took several steps deeper into the great hall. Afternoon light from the west-facing skylight 40 meters above fell in dusty columns. "It's incredible," he whispered. "St. Peter's in the new Vatican is nothing like this." Martin Silenus laughed. Thick light outlined his cheekbones and satyr's brows. "This was built for a living deity," he said.
Fedman Kassad lowered his travel bag to the floor and cleared his throat.
Surely this place predates the Shrike Church.
"It does," said the consul, "but they've occupied it for the past 2 centuries."
It doesn't look too occupied now, said Braun Lamia.
She held her father's automatic in her left hand. They had all shouted during their first 20 minutes in the keep, but the dying echoes, silences, and buzz of flies in the dining hall had reduced them to silence. "Sad King Billy's androids and Bond clones built the goddamn thing," said the poet. Sad King Billy's androids and Bond clones built the goddamn thing," said the poet. 8 local years of labor before the spin ships arrived. It was supposed to be the greatest tourist resort in the web, the jumping-off point for the time tombs in the city of poets. But I suspect that even then the poor schmuck android laborers knew the locals' version of the Shrike story. Saul Weintraub stood near an eastern window, holding his daughter up so that the soft light fell across her cheek and curled fist. "All that matters little now," he said. "Let's find the corner free of carnage where we can sleep and eat our evening meal." "Are we going on tonight?" asked Braun Lamia.
To the tombs?
asked Silenus, showing real surprise for the first time on the voyage.
You'd go to the Shrike in the dark?
Lamia shrugged. "What difference does it make?" The consul stood near a leaded glass door leading to a stone balcony and closed his eyes. His body still lurched and balanced to the movement of the tramcar. The night and day of travel above the peaks had blurred together in his mind, lost in the fatigue of almost 3 days without sleep and his rising tension. He opened his eyes before he dozed off, standing up. "We're tired," he said. "We'll stay here tonight and go down in the morning." Father Hoyt had gone out onto the narrow ledge of the balcony. He leaned on a railing of jagged stone. "Can we see the tombs from here?"
"No," said Silenus. "They're beyond that rise of hills. But see those white things to the north and west a bit? Those things gleaming like the shards of broken teeth in the sand?"
"Yes."
"That's the city of poets. King Billy's original site for Keats and for all things bright and beautiful. The locals say that it's haunted now by headless ghosts."
"Are you one of them?" asked Lamia. Martin Silenus turned to say something, looked a moment at the pistol still in her hand, shook his head, and turned away. Footsteps echoed from an unseen curve of staircase, and Colonel Kassad re-entered the room.
"There are 2 small storerooms above the dining hall," he said. "They have a section of balcony outside, but no other access than the stairway. Easy to defend. The rooms are clean."
Silenus laughed.
"Does that mean nothing can get at us? Or that, when something does get at us, we'll have no way to get out?"
"Where would we go?" asked Saul Weintraub. "Where indeed?" asked the consul. He was very tired. He lifted his gear and took one handle of the heavy Mobius cube, waiting for Father Hoyt to lift the other end. "Let's do what Kassad says. Find a space to spend the night. Let's at least get out of this room. It stinks of death." Dinner was the last. Sorry. Dinner was the last of their dried rations, some wine from Silenus's last bottle, and some stale cake which Saul Weintraub had brought along to celebrate their last evening together. Rachel was too little to eat the cake, but she took her milk and went to sleep on her stomach on a mat near her father. Lenar Hoyt removed a small balalaika from his pack and strummed a few chords. "I didn't know you played," said Braun Lamia. "Poorly." The consul rubbed his eyes. "I wish we had a piano."
You do have one,
said Martin Silenus.
The consul looked at the poet.
"Bring it here," said Silenus.
"I'd welcome a scotch."
"What are you talking about?" snapped Father Hoyt. "Make sense."
"His ship," said Silenus. "Do you remember our dear departed voice of the bush, Mastine, telling our consul friend that his secret weapon was that nice hegemony single ship sitting back at Keats Spaceport? Call it up, your consulship. Bring it on in."
Cassad moved away from the stairway where he had been placing trip beams.
"The planet's statosphere is dead. The comsats are down. The orbiting force ships are on tight beam. How is he supposed to call it?"
It was Lamia who spoke.
"A fat line transmitter."
The consul moved his stare to her.
"Fat line transmitters are the size of buildings," said Cassad.
Braun Lamia shrugged.
"What Mastine said made sense. Made sense. If I were the consul, if I were one of the few thousand individuals in the entire damn web to own a single ship, I'd be damn sure I could fly it in on remote if I needed it. The planet's too primitive to depend on its comnet. The ionosphere's too weak for shortwave. The comsats are the first things to go in a skirmish. I'd call it by fat line."
"And the size?" said the consul. Braun Lamia returned the diplomat's level gaze.
"The hegemony can't yet build portable fat line transmitters. There are rumors that the ousters can."
The consul smiled. From somewhere there came a scrape, and then the sound of metal crashing.
"Stay here,"
said Cassad. He removed a death wand from his tunic, cancelled the trip beams with his tactical comlog, and descended from sight.
"I guess we're under martial law now," said Silenus when the colonel was gone. "Mars Ascendant."
"Shut up," said Lamia.
"Do you think it's the Shrike?"
asked Hoyt. The consul made a gesture. "The Shrike doesn't have to clank around downstairs. It can simply appear here." Hoyt shook his head.
"I mean the Shrike that has been the cause of everyone's absence. The signs of slaughter here in the keep."
"The empty villages might be the result of the evacuation order," said the consul. "No one wants to stay behind to face the ousters. The SDF forces have been running wild. Much of the carnage could be their doing."
"With no bodies?" laughed Martin Silenus. "Wishful thinking. Our absent hosts downstairs dangle now on the Shrike's steel tree, where, ere long, we too will be."
"Shut up," Braun Lamia said tiredly.
"And if I don't," grinned the poet, "will you shoot me, madam?"
"Yes." The silence lasted until Colonel Cassad returned. He reactivated the trip beams and turned to the group seated on packing crates and flow foam cubes.
"It was nothing. Some carrion birds, harbingers, I think the locals call them, had come in through the broken glass doors in the dining hall, and were finishing the feast."
Silenus chuckled.
"Harbingers. Very appropriate."
Cassad sighed, sat on a blanket with his back to a crate, and poked at his cold food. A single lantern brought from the wind wagon lighted the room, and the shadows were beginning to mount the walls in the corners away from the door to the balcony.
"It's our last night," said Cassad. "One more story to tell."
He looked at the consul. The consul had been twisting his slip of paper with the number 7 scrawled on it. He licked his lips. What's the purpose? The purpose of the pilgrimage has been destroyed already. The others stirred. What do you mean? Asked Father Hoyt. The consul crumpled the paper and threw it into a corner. For the Shrike to grant a request, the band of pilgrims must constitute a prime number. We had 7. Mastine's disappearance reduces us to 6. We go to our deaths now with no hope of a wish being granted. Superstition, said Lamia. The consul sighed and rubbed his brow. Yes, but that is our final hope. Father Hoyt gestured toward the sleeping infant. Can't Rachel be our 7th? Saul Weintraub rubbed his beard.
No, a pilgrim must come to the tombs of his or her own free will.
But she did once, said Hoyt. Maybe it qualifies.
No, said the consul. Martin Silenus had been writing notes on a pad, but now he stood and paced the length of the room.
Jesus Christ, people! Look at us. We're not 6 fucking pilgrims, we're a mob. Hoyt there, with his cruciform, carrying the ghost of Father Paul Duray. Our semi-sentient Erg in the box there. Colonel Cassad, with his memory of Moneda. M. Braun there, if we are to believe her tale, carrying not only an unborn child, but a dead romantic poet. Our scholar with the child his daughter used to be. Me with my muse. The consul with whatever fucking baggage he's brought to this insane trek. My God, people, we should have received a fucking group rate for this trip.
Sit down, said Lamia in a dead even tone.
No, he's right, said Hoyt. Even the presence of Father Duray in the cruciform must affect the prime number superstition somehow. I say that we press on in the morning in the belief that... Look!
Cried Braun Lamia, pointing to the balcony doorway where the fading twilight had been replaced with pulses of strong light. The group went out into the cool evening air, shielding their eyes from the staggering display of silent explosions which filled the sky. Pure white fusion bursts, expanding like explosive ripples across a lapis pond. Smaller, brighter plasma implosions in blue and yellow and brightest red, curling inward like flowers folding for the night. The lightning dance of gigantic hell whip displays, beams the size of small worlds cutting their swath across light hours and being contorted by the riptides of defensive singularities. The aurora shimmer of defense fields, leaping and dying under the assault of terrible energies only to be reborn nanoseconds later. Amid it all, the blue-white fusion trails of torch ships and larger warships slicing perfectly true lines across the sky like diamond scratches on blue glass.
The ousters,
breathed Braun Lamia.
The war's begun,
said Cassad. There was no elation in his voice, no emotion of any kind.
The war's begun.
There we go. The consul was shocked to discover that he was weeping silently. He turned his face from the group.
Are we in danger here?
Asked Martin Silenus. He sheltered under the stone archway of the door, squinting at the brilliant display.
Not at this distance,
said Cassad. He raised his combat binoculars, made an adjustment, and consulted his tactical comlog.
Most of the engagements are at least 3 AU away. The ousters are testing the force space defenses.
He lowered the glasses.
It's just begun.
Has the forecaster been activated yet? Asked Braun Lamia. Are the people being evacuated from Keats and the other cities? Cassad shook his head.
I don't believe so. Not yet. The fleet will be fighting a holding action until the cislunar sphere is completed. Then the evacuation portals will be opened to the web, while force units come through by the hundreds.
He raised the binoculars again.
It'll be a hell of a show.
Look!
It was Father Hoyt pointing this time, not at the fireworks display in the sky, but out across the low dunes of the northern moors. Several kilometers toward the unseen tombs, a single figure was just visible as a speck of a form throwing multiple shadows under the fractured sky. Kassad trained his glasses on the figure.
The Shrike? Asked Lamia. No, I don't think so. I think it's a Templar by the looks of the robe.
Het Mastine!
Cried Father Hoyt. Kassad shrugged and handed the glasses around. The consul walked back to the group and leaned on the balcony. There was no sound but the whisper of wind, but that made the violence of explosions above them more ominous somehow. More ominous somehow. There we go. Emphasis on the right syllable. The consul took his turn looking when the glasses came to him. The figure was tall and robed, its back to the keep, and strode across the flashing vermilion sands with purposeful intent.
Is he headed toward us or the tombs?
The tombs, said the consul.
Oh, is he headed toward us or the tombs?
Asked Lamia. The tombs, said the consul. Father Hoyt leaned elbows on the ledge and raised his gaunt face to the exploding sky.
If it is Mastine, then we're back to 7, aren't we?
He'll arrive hours before us, said the consul. Half a day if we sleep here tonight as we proposed.
Hoyt shrugged. That can't matter too much. 7 set out on the pilgrimage, 7 will arrive. The Shrike will be satisfied.
If it is Mastine, said Colonel Kassad, why the charade on the wind wagon? And how did he get here before us? There were no other tram cars running, and he couldn't have walked over the bridle range passes.
We'll ask him when we arrive at the tombs tomorrow, Father Hoyt said tiredly.
Braun Lamia had been trying to raise someone on her comlog's general comm frequencies. Nothing emerged but the hiss of static and the occasional growl of distant EMPs. She looked at Colonel Kassad.
When do they start bombing? I don't know. It depends upon the strength of the Force Fleet defenses. The defenses weren't very good the other day when the Ouster scouts got through and destroyed the Yggdrasil, said Lamia. Kassad nodded.
Hey, said Martin Silenus, are we sitting on a fucking target?
Of course, said the consul. If the Ousters are attacking Hyperion to prevent the opening of the Time Tombs, as M. Lamia's tale suggests, then the tombs in this entire area would be a primary target.
For nukes?
Asked Silenus, his voice strained.
Almost certainly,
answered Kassad.
I thought something about the anti-entropic fields kept ships away from here, said Father Hoyt.
Crude ships. That's C-R-E-W-E-D, not C-R-U-D-E. Homophones are fun. Crude ships, said the consul, without looking back at the others from where he leaned on the railing. The anti-entropic fields won't bother guided missiles, smart bombs, or hellwhip beams. It won't bother mech infantry, for that matter. The Ousters could land a few attack skimmers or automated tanks and watch on remote while they destroy the valley.
but they won't,
said Braun Lamia. They want to control Hyperion, not destroy it.
I wouldn't wager my life on that supposition,
said Kassad. Lamia smiled at him. But we are, aren't we, Colonel? Oh, sorry. But we are, aren't we, Colonel? Above them, a single spark separated itself from the continuous patchwork of explosions, grew into a bright orange ember, and streaked across the sky. The group on the terrace could see the flames, hear the tortured shriek of atmospheric penetration. The fireball disappeared beyond the mountains behind the keep. Almost a minute later, the consul realized that he had been holding his breath, his hands rigid on the stone railing. He let out air in a gasp. The others seemed to be taking a breath at the same moment. There had been no explosion, no shockwave rumbling through the rock.
A dud?
Asked Father Hoyt.
Probably an injured force skirmisher trying to reach the orbital perimeter or the spaceport at Keats,
Said Colonel Cassad. He didn't make it, did he? Asked Lamia. Cassad did not respond. Martin Silenus lifted the field glasses and searched the darkening moors for the Templar.
Out of sight, said Silenus. The good captain either rounded that hill just this side of the Time Tombs Valley, or he pulled his disappearing act once again.
It's a pity we'll never hear his story,
said Father Hoyt. He turned toward the consul.
But we'll hear yours, won't we?
Won't we? The consul rubbed his palms against his pant legs. His heart was racing. Yes, he said, realizing even as he spoke that he had finally made up his mind. I'll tell mine. The wind roared down the east slopes of the mountains and whistled along the escarpment of Kronos Keep. The explosions above them seemed to have diminished ever so slightly, but the coming of darkness made each one look even more violent than the last. Let's go inside, said Lamia, her words almost lost in the wind sound. It's getting cold. They had turned off the single lamp, and the interior of the room was lighted only by the heat-lightning pulses of color from the sky outside. Shadows sprang into being, vanished, and appeared again as the room was painted in many colors. Sometimes the darkness would last several seconds before the next barrage. The consul reached into his traveling bag and took out a strange device, larger than a comlog, oddly ornamented, and fronted with a liquid crystal disky like something out of a history holo. Secret fat line transmitter? Braun Lamia asked dryly. The consul's smile showed no humor. It's an ancient comlog. It came out during the Hedge era. He removed a standard microdisc from a pouch on his belt and inserted it. Like Father Hoyt, I have someone else's tale to tell before you can understand my own.
Christ on a stick, sneered Martin Silenus. Am I the only one who can tell a straightforward story in this fucking herd? How long do I have to...
The consul's movement surprised even himself. He rose, spun, caught the smaller man by the cape and shirt front, slammed him against the wall, draped him over a packing crate with a knee in Silenus's belly and a forearm against his throat, and hissed, "One more word from you, poet, and I'll kill you." Yes, Jake-breaking truck, you punctuate all things. Sorry, I hope nobody else heard that.
Disadvantage of being located where I am located.
Silenus began to struggle, but a tightening on his windpipe and a glance at the consul's eyes made him cease. His face was very white. Colonel Cassad silently, almost gently, separated the two.
There will be no more comments,
he said. He touched the death wand in his belt. Martin Silenus went to the far side of the circle, still rubbing his throat, and slumped against a crate without a word. The consul strode to the door, took several deep breaths, and walked back to the group. He spoke to everyone but the poet. I'm sorry. It is just that I never expected to share this. The light from outside surged red and then white, followed by a blue glow which faded to near darkness. We know, Braun Lamia said softly. We all felt that way. The consul touched his lower lip, nodded, roughly cleared his throat, and came to sit by the ancient comlog. The recording is not as old as the instrument, he said. It was made about 50 standard years ago. I'll have some more to say when it's over. He paused as if there were more to be said, shook his head, and thumbed the antique disk key. There were no visuals. The voice was that of a young man. In the background one could hear a breeze blowing through grass or soft branches, and, more distantly, the roll of surf. Outside, the light pulsed madly as the tempo of the distant space battle quickened. The consul tensed as he waited for the crash and concussion. There was none. He closed his eyes and listened with the others. The Consul's Tale. Remembering Ciri. I climbed the steep hill to Ciri's tomb on the day the islands returned to the shallow seas of the equatorial archipelago. The day is perfect, and I hate it for being so. The sky is as tranquil as tales of old Earth's seas, the shallows are dappled with ultramarine tints, and a warm breeze blows in from the sea to ripple the russet willow grass on the hillside near me. Better low clouds and grey gloom on such a day. Better mist or a shrouding fog, which sets the mast in First Sight Harbor dripping and raises the lighthouse horn from its slumbers. Better one of the great sea simoons blowing up out of the cold belly of the south, lashing before it the motile isles and their dolphin herders until they seek refuge in the lee of our atolls and stony peaks. Anything would be better than this warm spring day, when the sun moves through a vault of sky so blue that it makes me want to run, to jump in great loping arcs, and to roll in the soft grass as Ciri and I have done at just this spot. Just this spot. I pause to look around. The willow grass bends and ripples like the fur of some great beast as the salt-tinged breeze gusts up out of the south. I shield my eyes and search the horizon, but nothing moves there. Out beyond the lava reef, the sea begins to chop and lift itself in nervous strokes. Ciri, I whisper. I say her name without meaning to do so. 100 meters down the slope, the crowd pauses to watch me and to catch its collective breath. The procession of mourners and celebrants stretches for more than a kilometer to where the white buildings of the city begin. I can make out the grey and balding head of my younger son in the vanguard. He is wearing the blue and gold robes of the hegemony. I know I should wait for him, walk with him, but he and the other aging council members cannot keep up with my young, ship-trained muscles and steady stride. But decorum dictates that I should walk with him and my granddaughter Lyra and my 9-year-old grandson. To hell with it, and to hell with them. I turn and jog up the steep hillside. Sweat begins to soak my loose cotton shirt before I reach the curving summit of the ridge and catch sight of the tomb. Ciri's tomb. I stop. The wind chills me, although the sunlight is warm enough. As it glints off the flawless white stone of the silent mausoleum. The grass is high near the sealed entrance to the crypt. Rows of faded festival pennants on ebony staffs line the narrow gravel path. Hesitating, I circle the tomb and approach the steep cliff edge a few meters beyond. The willow grass is bent and trampled here, where irreverent picnickers have laid their blankets. There are several fire rings formed from the perfectly round, perfectly white stones purloined from the border of the gravel path. I cannot stop a smile. I know the view from here, the great curve of the outer harbor with its natural sea wall, the low, white buildings of first sight, and the colorful hulls and masts of the catamarans bobbing at anchorage. Near the pebble beach beyond Common Hall, a young woman in a white skirt moves toward the water. For a second I think that it is Ciri, and my heart pounds. I half prepare to throw up my arms in response to her wave, but she does not wave. I watch in silence as the distant figure turns away and is lost in the shadows of the old boat building. Above me, far out from the cliff, a wide-winged Thomas Hawk, circles above the lagoon on rising thermals and scans the shifting blue kelp beds with its infrared vision, seeking out harp seals or torpids. Nature is stupid, I think, and sit on the soft grass. Nature sets the stage all wrong for such a day, and then it is insensitive enough to throw in a bird searching for prey which have long since fled the polluted waters near the growing city. I remember another Thomas Hawk on that first night when Ciri and I came to this hilltop. I remember the moonlight on its wings and the strange, haunting cry which echoed off the cliff and seemed to pierce the dark air above the gaslights of the village below. Ciri was 16. No, not quite 16, and the moonlight that touched the hawk's wings above us also painted her bare skin with milky light and cast shadows beneath the soft circles of her breasts. We looked up guiltily when the bird's cry cut the night, and Ciri said,
It was the nightingale and not the lark that pierced the fearful hollow of thine ear.
Huh? I said. Ciri was almost 16. I was 19. But Ciri knew the slow pace of books and the cadences of theatre under the stars. I knew only the stars.
Relax, young shipman, she whispered,
And pulled me down beside her then.
It's only an old Tom's hawk hunting. Stupid bird. Come back, shipman. Come back, Merrin.
The Los Angeles had chosen that moment to rise above the horizon, and to float like a wind-borne ember west across the strange constellations of Maui Covenant, Ciri's world. I lay next to her and described the workings of the great Hawking Drive spinship, which was catching the high sunlight against the drop of night above us, and all the while my hand was sliding lower along her smooth side. Her skin seemed all velvet and electricity, and her breath came more quickly against my shoulder. I lowered my face to the hollow of her neck, to the sweat and perfume essence of her tousled hair.
Ciri,
I say, and this time her name is not unbidden. Below me, below the crest of the hill and the shadow of the white tomb, the crowd stands and shuffles. They are impatient with me. They want me to unseal the tomb, to enter and to have my private moment in the cool, silent emptiness that has replaced the warm presence that was Ciri. They want me to say my farewells so they can get on with their rites. Their rites and rituals, open the Farcaster doors, and join the waiting world web of the hegemony. To hell with that, and to hell with them. I pull up a tendril of the thickly woven willow grass, chew on the sweet stem, and watch the horizon for the first sign of the migrating islands. The shadows are still long in the morning light. The day is young. I will sit here for a while and remember. I will remember Ciri. Ciri was a bird, I think, the first time I saw her. She was wearing some sort of mask with bright feathers. When she removed it to join in the raceme quadrille, Raceme? Raceme. Quadrille, or quadrille, or quadre, is fairly straightforward, but raceme? It could be pronounced any way. We're going to go with raceme. Raceme quadrille. There we go. The torchlight
caught the deep auburn tints of her hair. She was flushed, cheeks aflame, and even from across the crowded common I could see the startling green of her eyes, contrasting with the summer heat of her face and hair. It was festival night, of course. The torches danced and sparked to the stiff breeze coming in off the harbor, and the sound of the flutists on the breakwall playing for the passing isles was almost drowned out by surf sounds and the crack of pennants snapping in the wind. Ciri was almost 16, and her beauty burned more brightly than any of the torches set round the throng-filled square. I pushed through the dancing crowd and went to her. It was 5 years ago for me. It was more than 65 years ago for us. It seems only yesterday. This is not going well. Where to start?
What say we go find a little nookie, kid?
Mike Osho was speaking. Short, squat, his pudgy face a clever caricature of a Buddha. Mike was a god to me then. We were all gods, long-lived if not immortal, well-paid if not quite divine. The hegemony had chosen us to help crew one of its precious quantum leap spin ships, so how could we be less than gods? It was just that Mike, brilliant, mercurial, irreverent Mike, was a little older and a little higher in the shipboard pantheon than young Marin Aspic. "Ha! Zero probability of that," I said. We were scrubbing up after a 12-hour shift with the Farcaster construction crew. Shuttling the workers around their chosen singularity point, some 163,000 kilometers out from Maui Covenant, was a lot less glamorous for us than the 4-month leap from hegemony space. During the C-plus portion of the trip, we had been master specialists, 49 starship experts, shepherding some 200 nervous passengers. Now the passengers had their hard suits on, and we shipmen had been reduced to serving as glorified truck drivers as the construction crew wrestled the bulky singularity containment sphere into place. Zero probability, I repeated, unless the groundlings have added a whorehouse to that quarantine island they leased us.
Nope, they haven't,
grinned Mike. He and I had our 3 days of planetary R&R coming up, but we knew from Shipmaster Singh's briefings and the moans of our shipmates that the only ground time we had to look forward to would be spent on a 7 by 4 kilometer island administered by the hegemony. It wasn't even one of the motile islands we had heard about, just another volcanic peak near the equator. Once there, we could count on real gravity underfoot, unfiltered air to breathe, and the chance to taste unsynthesized food. But we could also count on the fact that the only intercourse we would have with the Maui Covenant colonists would be through buying local artifacts at the duty-free store. Even those were sold by hegemony trade specialists. Many of our shipmates had chosen to spend their R&R on the Los Angeles. So how do we find a little nookie, Mike? The colonies are off limits until the Farcaster's working. That's about 60 years away, local time. Or are you talking about Meg and SpinComp?
Stick with me, kid, said Mike. Where there's a will, there's a way.
I stuck with Mike. There were only 5 of us in the dropship. It was always a thrill to me to fall out of high orbit into the atmosphere of a real world, especially a world that looked as much like old Earth as Maui Covenant did. I stared at the blue and white limb of the planet until the seas were down and we were in atmosphere, approaching the twilight terminator in a gentle glide at 3 times the speed of our own sound. We were gods then, but even gods must descend from their high thrones upon occasion. Ciri's body never ceased to amaze me. That time on the archipelago,
That time on the archipelago? 3 weeks in that huge, swaying treehouse under the billowing tree sails, with the dolphin herders keeping pace like outriders, tropical sunsets filling the evening with wonder, the canopy of stars at night, and our own wake marked by 1,000 phosphorescent swirls that mirrored the constellations above. And still it is Ciri's body I remember. For some reason, shyness, the years of separation, she wore 2 strips of swimsuit for the first few days of our archipelago stay, and the soft white of her breasts and lower belly had not darkened to match the rest of her tan before I had to leave again. I remember her that first time. Triangles in the moonlight as we lay in the soft grass above First Sight Harbor, her silk pants catching on a weave of willow grass. There was a child's modesty then, the slight hesitation of something given prematurely, but also pride. The same pride that allowed her to face down the angry mob of separatists on the steps of the hegemony consulate in South Turn and send them to their homes in shame. I remember my 5th planetfall, our 4th reunion. It was one of the few times I ever saw her cry. She was almost regal in her fame and wisdom by then. She had been elected 4 times to the All Thing, and the Hegemony Council turned to her for advice and guidance. She wore her independence like a royal cloak, and her fierce pride had never burned more brightly. But when we were alone in the stone villa south of Feverone, it was she who turned away. I was nervous, frightened by this powerful stranger, but it was Ciri of the straight back and proud eyes, who turned her face to the wall and said through tears, "Go away, go away, Merrin. I don't want you to see me. I'm a crone, all slack and sagging. Go away." I confess I was rough with her then. I pinned her wrists with my left hand, using a strength which surprised even me, and tore her silken robe down the front in one move. I kissed her shoulders, her neck, the faded shadows of stretch marks on her taut belly, and the scar on her upper leg from the skimmer crash some 40 of her years earlier. I kissed her graying hair and the lines etched in the once smooth cheeks. I kissed her tears. "Jesus, Mike, this can't be legal," I'd said when my friend unrolled the hawking mat from his backpack. We were on Island 241, as the hegemony traders had so romantically named the desolate volcanic blemish which they had chosen for our R&R site. Island 241 was less than 50 kilometers from the oldest of the colonial settlements, but it might as well have been 50 light years away. No native ships were to put in at the island while Los Angeles crewmen or Farcaster workmen were present. The Maui Covenant colonists had a few ancient skimmers still in working order, but by mutual agreement there would be no overflights. Except for the dormitories, swimming beach, and the duty-free store, there was little on the island to interest us shipmen. Some day, when the last components had been brought in system by the Los Angeles and the Farcaster finished, hegemony officials would make Island 241 into a center for trade and tourism. Until then, it was a primitive place with a dropship grid, newly finished buildings of the local white stone, and a few bored maintenance people. Mike checked the 2 of us out for 3 days of backpacking on the steepest and most inaccessible end of the little island. I don't want to go backpacking for Christ's sake," I'd said. "I'd rather stay on the LA and plug into a stim sim." "Shut up and follow me," said Mike, and, like a lesser member of the pantheon following an older and wiser deity, I had shut up and followed. 2 hours of heavy tramping up the slopes through sharp-branched scrub trees brought us to a lip of lava several hundred meters above the crashing surf. We were near the equator on a mostly tropical world, but on this exposed ledge the wind was howling and my teeth were chattering. The sunset was a red smear between dark cumulus to the west, and I had no wish to be out in the open when full night descended. Come on, I said. Let's get out of the wind and build a fire. I don't know how the hell we're going to set up a tent on all of this rock. Mike sat down and lit a cannabis stick.
Take a look in your pack, kid.
I hesitated. His voice had been neutral, but it was the flat neutrality of the practical joker's voice just before the bucket of water descends. The pack was empty except for old flow foam packing cubes to fill it out. Those and a harlequin's costume complete with mask and bells on the toes. Are you goddamn crazy? I spluttered. It was getting dark quickly now. The storm might or might not pass to the south of us. The surf was rasping below like a hungry beast. If I had known how to find my own way back to the trade compound in the dark, I might have considered leaving Mike Osho's remains to feed the fishes far below. Now look at what's in my pack, he said. Mike dumped out some flow foam cubes and then removed some jewelry of the type I'd seen handcrafted on Renaissance Vector, an inertial compass, a laser pen which might or might not be labeled a concealed weapon by ship security, another harlequin costume, this one tailored to his more rotund form, and a hawking mat. Jesus, Mike, I said, while running my hand over the exquisite design of the old carpet, this can't be legal.
I didn't notice any customs agents back there, grinned Mike, and I seriously doubt that the locals will have any traffic control ordinances.
Yes, but I trailed off and unrolled the rest of the mat. It was a little more than 1 meter wide and about 2 meters long. The rich fabric had faded with age, but the flight threads were still as bright as new copper. Where did you get it? I asked. Does it still work?
On garden,
said Mike, and stuffed my costume and his other gear into his backpack.
Yes, it does. On garden, yes, it does.
There we go. Sorry. I keep losing Mike's voice. I apologize. It had been more than a century since old Vladimir Sholokov, old Earth emigrant, master lepidopterist, and EM systems engineer, had handcrafted the first hawking mat for his beautiful young niece on New Earth. Legend had it that the niece had scorned the gift, but over the decades the toys had become almost absurdly popular, more with rich adults than with children, until they were outlawed on most hegemony worlds. Dangerous to handle, a waste of shielded monofilaments, almost impossible to deal with in controlled airspace, hawking mats had become curiosities reserved for bedtime stories, museums, and a few colony worlds. It must have cost you a fortune, I said.
30 marks, said Mike, and settled himself on the center of the carpet. The old dealer in Carvnal Marketplace thought it was worthless. It was, for him. I brought it back to the ship, charged it up, reprogrammed the inertia chips, and voila!
Mike palmed the intricate design, and the mat stiffened and rose 15 centimeters above the rock ledge. I stared doubtfully. All right, I said, but what if it...
It won't, said Mike, and impatiently patted the carpet behind him. It's fully charged. I know how to handle it. Come on, climb on or stand back. I want to get going before that storm gets any closer.
But I don't think...
Come on, Merrin, make up your mind. I'm in a hurry.
I hesitated for another second or two. If we were caught leaving the island, we would both be kicked off the ship. Shipwork was my life now. I had made that decision when I accepted the 8-mission Maui Covenant contract. More than that, I was 200 light years and 5.5 leap years from civilization. Even if they brought us back to hegemony space, the round trip would have cost us 11 years' worth of friends and family. The time debt was irrevocable. I crawled on the hovering hawking mat behind Mike. He stuffed the backpack between us, told me to hang on, and tapped at the flight designs. The mat rose 5 meters above the ledge, banked quickly to the left, and shot out over the alien ocean. 300 meters below us, the surf crashed whitely in the deepening gloom. We rose higher above the rough water and headed north into the night. In such seconds of decision, entire futures are made. I remember talking to Siri during our second reunion, shortly after we visited the villa along the coast near Feverone. We were walking along the beach. Haljan had been allowed to stay in the city under Magritte's supervision. It was just as well. I was not truly comfortable with the boy. Only the undeniable green solemnity of his eyes and the disturbing mirror familiarity of his short, dark curls and snub of a nose served to tie him to me. To us, in my mind. That and the quick, almost sardonic smile I would catch him hiding from Siri when she reprimanded him. It was a smile too cynically amused and self-observant to be so practiced in a 10-year-old. I knew it well. I would have thought such things were learned, not inherited.
You know very little,
Siri said to me. She was wading, shoeless, in a shallow tide pool. From time to time she would lift the delicate shell of a French horn conch, inspect it for flaws, and drop it back into the silty water. I've been well trained, I replied.
Yes, I'm sure you've been well trained, agreed Siri. I know you are quite skilful, Merrin, but you know very little.
Irritated, unsure of how to respond, I walked along with my head lowered. I dug a white lava stone out of the sand and tossed it far out into the bay. Rain clouds were piling along the eastern horizon. I found myself wishing that I was back aboard the ship. I had been reluctant to return this time, and now I knew that it had been a mistake. It was my third visit to Maui Covenant, our second reunion, as the poets and her people were calling it. I was 5 months away from being 21 standard years old. Siri had just celebrated her 37th birthday 3 weeks earlier. I've been to a lot of places you've never seen, I said at last. It sounded petulant and childish even to me.
Oh, yes,
said Siri, and clapped her hands together. For a second, in her enthusiasm, I glimpsed my other Siri, the young girl I had dreamed about during the long 9 months of turnaround. Then the image slid back to harsh reality, and I was all too aware of her short hair, the loosening neck muscles, and the cords appearing on the backs of those once beloved hands.
You've been to places I'll never see,
said Siri in a rush. Her voice was the same, almost the same.
Merrin, my love, you've already seen things I cannot even imagine. You probably know more facts about the universe than I would guess exist. But you know very little, my darling.
What the hell are you talking about, Siri? I sat down on a half-submerged log near the strip of wet sand and drew my knees up like a fence between us. Siri strode out of the tide pool and came to kneel in front of me. She took my hands in hers, and, although mine were bigger, heavier, blunter of finger and bone, I could feel the strength in hers. I imagined it as the strength of years I had not shared.
You have to live to really know things, my love. Having Haljan has helped me to understand that. There is something about raising a child that helps to sharpen one's sense of what is real.
How do you mean? Siri squinted away from me for a few seconds and absently brushed back a strand of hair. Her left hand stayed firmly around both of mine.
I'm not sure, she said softly. I think one begins to feel when things aren't important. I'm not sure how to put it. When you've spent 30 years entering rooms filled with strangers, you feel less pressure than when you've had only half that number of years of experience. You know what the room and the people in it probably hold for you, and you go looking for it. If it's not there, you sense it earlier and leave to go about your business. You just know more about what it is, what it isn't, and how little time there is to learn the difference. Do you understand, Merrin? Do you follow me even a little bit?
No, I said. Ciri nodded and bit her lower lip, but she did not speak again for a while. Instead, she leaned over and kissed me. Her lips were dry and a little questioning. I held back for a second, seeing the sky beyond her, wanting time to think. But then I felt the warm intrusion of her tongue and closed my eyes. The tide was coming in behind us. I felt a sympathetic warmth and rising as Ciri unbuttoned my shirt and ran sharp fingernails across my chest. There was a second of emptiness between us, and I opened my eyes in time to see her unfastening the last buttons on the front of her white dress. Her breasts were larger than I remembered, heavier, the nipples broader and darker. The chill air nipped at both of us until I pulled the fabric down her shoulders and brought our upper bodies together. We slid down along the log to the warm sand. I pressed her closer, all the while wondering how I could possibly have thought her the stronger one. Her skin tasted of salt. Ciri's hands helped me. Her short hair pressed back against bleached wood, white cotton, and sand. My pulse outraced the surf.
Do you understand, Merrin?
She whispered to me seconds later as her warmth connected us. Yes, I whispered back, but I did not. Mike brought the hawking mat in from the east toward First Sight. The flight had taken over an hour in the dark, and I had spent most of the time huddling from the wind and waiting for the carpet to fold up and tumble us both into the sea. We were still half an hour out when we saw the first of the Motile Isles. Racing before the storm, tree sails billowing, the islands sailed up from their southern feeding grounds in seemingly endless procession. Many were lit brilliantly, festooned with colored lanterns and shifting veils of gossamer light. "You sure this is the way?" I shouted. "Yes!" shouted Mike. He did not turn his head. The wind whipped his long black hair back against my face. From time to time he would check his compass and make small corrections to our course. It might have been easier to follow the isles. We passed one, a large one almost half a kilometer in length, and I strained to make out details, but the isle was dark except for the glow of its phosphorescent wake. Dark shapes cut through the milky waves. I tapped Mike on the shoulder and pointed. "Dolphins!" he shouted. "That's what this colony was all about, remember? A bunch of do-gooders during the hedge-era wanted to save all the mammals in old Earth's oceans. Didn't succeed." "Oh, sorry. Dolphins!" he shouted. "That's what this colony was all about, remember? A bunch of do-gooders during the hedge-era wanted to save all the mammals in the old Earth's oceans. Didn't succeed." I would have shouted another question, but at that moment the headland and First Sight harbor came into view. I had thought the stars were bright above Maui Covenant. I had thought the migrating islands were memorable in their colorful display. But the city of First Sight, wrapped about with harbor and hills, was a blazing beacon in the night. Its brilliance reminded me of a torch ship I had once watched while it created its own plasma nova against the dark limb of a sullen gas giant. The city was a five-tiered honeycomb of white buildings, all illuminated by warmly glowing lanterns from within and by countless torches from without. The white lava stone of the volcanic island itself seemed to glow from the city light. Beyond the town were tents, pavilions, campfires, cooking fires, and great flaming pyres, too large for function, too large for anything except to serve as a welcome to the returning isles. The harbor was filled with boats, bobbing catamarans with cowbells clanking from their masts, large-hulled, flat-bottomed houseboats built for creeping from port to port in the calm equatorial shallows, but proudly ablaze with strings of lights this night, and then the occasional ocean-going yacht, sleek and functional as a shark. A lighthouse set out on the pincer's end of the harbor reef threw its beam far out to sea, illuminated wave and isle alike, and then swept its light back in to catch the colorful bobbing of ships and men.
Even from 2 kilometers out we could hear the noise. Sounds of celebration were clearly audible. Above the shouts and constant susurration of the surf rose the unmistakable notes of a Bach flute sonata. I learned later that this welcoming chorus was transmitted through hydrophones to the passage channels where dolphins leaped and cavorted to the music.
My God, Mike, how did you know all of this was going on?
I asked the ship main computer, said Mike. The hawking mat banked right to keep us far out from the ships and lighthouse beam. Then we curved back in north of first sight toward a dark spit of land. I could hear the soft booming of waves on the shallows ahead.
They have this festival every year, Mike went on. But this is their sesquicentennial. Sesquicentennial.
Sorry, excuse me, of course. Excuse me. My diaphragm did not like something. There we go.
They have this festival every year, Mike went on, but this is their sesquicentennial. The party's been going on for 3 weeks now and is scheduled to continue another 2. There are only about 100,000 colonists in this whole world, Marin, and I bet half of them are here partying.
We slowed, came in carefully, and touched down on a rocky outcropping not far from the beach. The storm had missed us to the south, but intermittent flashes of lightning and the distant lights of advancing isles still marked the horizon. Overhead, the stars were not dimmed by the glow from first sight, just over the rise from us. The air was warmer here, and I caught the scent of orchards on the breeze. We folded up the hawking mat and hurried to get into our harlequin costumes. Mike slipped his laser pen and jewelry into loose pockets. "What are those for?" I asked as we secured the backpack and hawking mat under a large boulder.
These?
Asked Mike as he dangled a Renaissance necklace from his fingers.
These are currency in case we have to negotiate for favors.
Favors?
Favors, repeated Mike. A lady's largesse. Comfort to a weary spacefarer. Nookie to you, kid.
Oh, I said, and adjusted my mask and fool's cap. The bells made a soft sound in the dark.
Come on, said Mike. We'll miss the party.
I nodded and followed him, bells jangling, as we picked our way over stone and scrub toward the waiting light. I sit here in the sunlight and wait. I am not totally certain what I am waiting for. I can feel a growing warmth on my back as the morning sunlight is reflected from the white stone of Ceres' tomb. Ceres' tomb? There are no clouds in the sky. I raise my head and squint skyward as if I might be able to see the LA and the newly finished Farcaster array through the glare of atmosphere. I cannot. Part of me knows that they have not risen yet. Part of me knows to the second the time remaining before the ship and Farcaster complete their transit to the zenith. Part of me does not want to think about it. Siri, am I doing the right thing? There is the sudden sound of pennants stirring on their staffs as the wind comes up. I sense rather than see the restlessness of the waiting crowd. For the first time since my planetfall for this, our 6th reunion, I am filled with sorrow. No, not sorrow, not yet, but a sharp-toothed sadness which soon will open into grief. For years I have carried on silent conversations with Siri, framing questions to myself for future discussion with her, and it suddenly strikes me with cold clarity that we will never again sit together and talk. An emptiness begins to grow inside me. Should I let it happen, Siri? There is no response except for the growing murmurs of the crowd. In a few minutes they will sell Donal, my younger and surviving son, or his daughter Lyra and her brother up the hill to urge me on. I toss away the sprig of willow grass I've been chewing on. There is a hint of shadow on the horizon. It could be a cloud.
Or it could be the first of the isles, driven by instinct and the spring northerlies, to migrate back to the great band of the equatorial shallows from whence they came. It does not matter. Siri, am I doing the right thing? There is no answer, and the time grows shorter. Sometimes Siri seemed so ignorant it made me sick. She knew nothing of my life away from her. She would ask questions, but I sometimes wondered if she was interested in the answers. I spent many hours explaining the beautiful physics behind our spin ships, but she never did seem to understand. Once, after I had taken great care to detail the differences between their ancient seed ship and the Los Angeles, Siri astounded me by asking, "But why did it take my ancestors 80 years of ship time to reach Maui Covenant when you can make the trip in 130 days?" She had understood nothing. Siri's sense of history was, at best, pitiful. She viewed the hegemony and the world web the way a child would view the fantasy world of a pleasant but rather silly myth. There was an indifference there that almost drove me mad at times. Siri knew all about the early days of the Hegira, at least insofar as they pertained to the Maui Covenant. At least insofar as they pertained to the Maui Covenant and the colonists, and she occasionally would come up with delightful bits of archaic trivia or phraseology, but she knew nothing of post-Hegira realities. Names like Garden and the Ousters, Renaissance and Lusus meant little to her. I could mention Salmud Brevi or General Horace Glenenheidt, and she would have no associations or reactions at all. None. The last time I saw Siri, she was 70 standard years old. She was 70 years old, and still she had never traveled off-world, used a fat line, tasted any alcoholic drink except wine, interfaced with an empathy surgeon, stepped through a Farcaster door, smoked a cannabis stick, received gene tailoring, plugged into a stim sim, received any formal schooling, taken any RNA medication, heard of Zen Gnostics or the Shrike Church, or flown any vehicle except an ancient Viking skimmer belonging to her family. Siri had never made love to anyone except me, or so she said, and so I believed. It was during our first reunion, that time on the archipelago, when Siri took me to talk with the dolphins. We had risen to watch the dawn. The highest levels of the tree-house were a perfect place from which to watch the eastern sky pale and fade to morning. Ripples of high cirrus turned to rose, and then the sea itself grew molten as the sun floated above the flat horizon. "Let's go swimming," said Siri. The rich horizontal light bathed her skin and threw her shadow 4 meters across the boards of the platform. "I'm too tired," I said. "Later." We had lain awake most of the night, talking, making love, talking, and making love again. In the glare of morning I felt empty and vaguely nauseated. I sensed the slight movement of the isle under me as a tinge of vertigo, a drunkard's disconnection from gravity. "No, let's go now," said Siri, and grasped my hand to pull me along. I was irritated, but did not argue. Siri was 26, 7 years older than I during that first reunion, but her impulsive behavior often reminded me of the teenaged Siri I had carried away from the festival only 10 of my months earlier. Her deep, unself-conscious laugh was the same. Her green eyes cut as sharply when she was impatient. The long mane of auburn hair had not changed. But her body had ripened, filled out with a promise which had only been hinted at before. Her breasts were still high and full, almost girlish, bordered above by freckles that gave way to a whiteness so translucent that a gentle blue tracery of veins could be seen. But they were different somehow, She was different. "Are you going to join me or just sit there staring?" asked Siri. She had slipped off her caftan as we came out onto the lowest deck. Our small ship was still tied to the dock. Above us, the island's tree sails were beginning to open to the morning breeze. For the past several days, Siri had insisted on wearing swim strips when we went into the water. She wore none now. Her nipples rose in the cool air. "Won't we be left behind?" I asked, squinting up at the flapping tree sails. On previous days we had waited for the doldrums in the middle of the day, when the isle was still in the water, the sea a glazed mirror. Now the jib vines were beginning to pull taut as the thick leaves filled with wind. "Don't be silly," said Siri. "We could always catch a keel root and follow it back. That or a feeding tendril. Come on." She tossed an osmosis mask at me and donned her own. The transparent film made her face look slick with oil. From the pocket of her caftan she lifted a thick medallion and set it in place around her neck. The metal looked dark and ominous against her skin. "What's that?" I asked. Siri did not lift the osmosis mask to answer. She set the com threads in place against her neck and handed me the hear plugs. That is spelled HEAR plugs. Her voice was tinny. "Translation disc," she said. "Thought you knew all about gadgets, Merrin. Last one in's a sea slug." She held the disc in place between her breasts with one hand and stepped off the aisle. I could see the pale globes of her buttocks as she pirouetted and kicked for depth. In seconds she was only a white blur deep in the water. I slipped my own mask on, pressed the com threads tight, and stepped into the sea. The bottom of the aisle was a dark stain on a ceiling of crystalline light. I was wary of the thick feeding tendrils, even though Siri had amply demonstrated that they were interested in devouring nothing larger than the tiny zooplankton that even now caught the sunlight like dust in an abandoned ballroom. Keel roots descended like gnarled stalactites for hundreds of meters into the purple depths. The aisle was moving. I could see the faint fibrillation of the tendrils as they trailed along. A wake caught the light 10 meters above me. For a second I was choking, the gel of the mask smothering me as surely as the surrounding water would, and then I relaxed, and the air flowed freely into my lungs. "Deeper, Merrin," came Siri's voice. I blinked, a slow-motion blink as the mask readjusted itself over my eyes, and caught sight of Siri 20 meters lower, grasping a keel root and trailing effortlessly above the colder, deeper currents where the light did not reach. I thought of the thousands of meters of water under me, of the things which might lurk there, unknown, unsought out by the human colonists. I thought of the dark and the depths, and my scrotum tightened involuntarily. "Come on down!" Siri's voice was an insect buzz in my ears. I rotated and kicked. The buoyancy here was not so great as in old Earth seas, but it still took energy to dive so deep. The mask compensated for depth and nitrogen, but I could feel the pressure against my skin and ears. Finally, I quit kicking, grabbed a keel root, and roughly hauled myself down to Siri's level. We floated side by side in the dim light. Siri was a spectral figure here, her long hair swirling in a wine-dark nimbus, the pale strips of her body glowing in the blue-green light. The surface seemed impossibly distant. The widening V of the wake and the drift of the scores of tendrils showed that the isle was moving more quickly now, moving mindlessly to other feeding grounds, distant waters. "Where are the—" I began to sub-vocalize. "Shh," said Siri. She fiddled with the medallion. I could hear them then, the shrieks and trills and whistles and cat purrs and echoing cries. The depths were suddenly filled with strange music. "Jesus," I said, and because Siri had tuned our com threads to the translator, the word was broadcast as a senseless whistle and toot. "Hello!" she called, and the translated greeting echoed from the Ah!
Sorry about that. It was a bogus garbage call. I needed to tell them what for. I may have used some expletives. I didn't. But I may have. I certainly thought them. Where were we? I'm not certain where we were. Let's see. Ah,
Hello, she called, and the translated greeting echoed from the transmitter. A high-speed bird's call, sliding into the ultrasonic. Hello, she called again. Minutes passed before the dolphins came to investigate. They rolled past us, surprisingly large, alarmingly large, their skin looking slick and muscled in the uncertain light. A large one swam within a meter of us, turning at the last moment, so that the white of his belly curved past us like a wall. I could see the dark eye rotate to follow me as he passed. One stroke of his wide fluke kicked up a turbulence strong enough to convince me of the animal's power. "Hello!" called Siri, but the swift form faded into distant haze, and there was a sudden silence. Siri clicked off the translator. "Do you want to talk to them?" she asked. "Sure." I was dubious. More than 3 centuries of effort had not raised much of a dialogue between man and sea mammal. Mike had once told me that the thought structures of old Earth's 2 groups of orphans were too different, the referents too few. One pre-Hejira expert had written that speaking to a dolphin or porpoise was about as rewarding as speaking to a 1-year-old human infant. Both sides usually enjoyed the exchange, and there was a simulacrum of conversation, but neither party would come away the more knowledgeable. Siri switched the translator disc back on. "Hello," I said. There was a final minute of silence, and then our earphones were buzzing, while the sea echoed shrill ululations. "Distance, no fluke. Hello tone, current pulse, circle me funny?" "What the hell?" I asked Siri, and the translator trilled out my question. Siri was grinning under her osmosis mask. I tried again. "Hello, greetings from, the surface. How are you?" The large male, I assumed it to be a male, curved in toward us like a torpedo. He arch-kicked his way through the water 10 times faster than I could have swum, even if I had remembered to don flippers that morning. For a second I thought he was going to ram us, and I raised my knees and clung tightly to the keel root. Then he was past us, climbing for air, while Siri and I reeled from his turbulent wake and the high tones of his shout. "No fluke, no feed, no swim, no play, no fun." Siri switched off the translator and floated closer. She lightly grasped my shoulders while I held on to the keel root with my right hand. Our legs touched as we drifted through the warm water. A school of tiny crimson warrior fish flickered above us, while the dark shapes of the dolphins circled farther out. "Had enough?" she asked. Her hand was flat on my chest. "One more try," I said. Siri nodded and twisted the disc to life. The current pushed us together again. She slid her arm around me. "Why do you herd the islands?" I asked the bottle-nosed shapes circling in the dappled light. "How does it benefit you to stay with the isles?"
Sounding now, old songs, deep water, no great voices, no shark, old songs, new songs.
Siri's body lay along the length of me now. Her left arm tightened around me. "Great voices were the whales," she whispered. Her hair fanned out in streamers. Her right hand moved down and seemed surprised at what it found. "Do you miss the great voices?" I asked the shadows. There was no response. Siri slid her legs around my hips. The surface was a churning bowl of light 40 meters above us. "What do you miss most of old Earth's oceans?" I asked.
With my left arm, I pulled Ciri closer, slid my hand down along the curve of her back to where her buttocks rose to meet my palm, held her tight. To the circling dolphins we must have appeared a single creature. Ciri lifted herself against me, and we became a single creature. The translator disc had twisted around so it trailed over Ciri's shoulder. I reached to shut it off, but paused as the answer to my question buzzed urgently in our ears.
Miss Shark! Miss Shark! Miss Shark! Miss Shark! 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 Shark!
I turned off the disc and shook my head. I did not understand. There was so much I did not understand. I closed my eyes as Ciri and I moved gently to the rhythms of the current and ourselves while the dolphins swam nearby, and the cadence of their calls took on the sad, slow trilling of an old lament. Ciri and I came down out of the hills and returned to the festival just before sunrise of the second day. For a night and a day we had roamed the hills, eaten with strangers in pavilions of orange silk, bathed together in the icy waters of the Shree, and danced to the music which never ceased going out to the endless file of passing isles. We were hungry. I had awakened at sunset to find Ciri gone. She returned before the moon of Maui Covenant rose. She told me that her parents had gone off with friends for several days on a slow-moving houseboat. They had left the family skimmer in First Sight. Now we worked our way from dance to dance, bonfire to bonfire, back to the center of the city. We planned to fly west to her family estate near Feverone. It was very late, but First Sight Common still had its share of revelers. I was very happy. I was 19, and I was in love, and the .93 gravity of Maui Covenant seemed much less to me. I could have flown had I wished. I could have done anything. We had stopped at a booth and bought fried dough and mugs of black coffee. Suddenly a thought struck me. I asked, "How did you know I was a shipman?"
Hush, friend Merrin. Eat your poor breakfast. When we get to the villa, I will fix a true meal to break our fast.
"No, I'm serious," I said, and wiped grease off my chin with the sleeve of my less than clean harlequin's costume. "This morning you said that you knew right away last night that I was from the ship. Why was that? Was it my accent? My costume? Mike and I saw other fellows dressed like this." Ciri laughed and brushed back her hair.
Just be glad it was I who spied you out, Merrin, my love. Had it been my Uncle Gresham or his friends, it would have meant trouble.
"Oh, why is that?" I picked up one more fried ring, and Ciri paid for it. I followed her through the thinning crowd. Despite the motion and the music all about, I felt weariness beginning to work on me.
They are separatists, said Ciri. Uncle Gresham recently gave a speech before the council, urging that we fight rather than agree to be swallowed into your hegemony. He said that we should destroy your Farcaster device before it destroys us.
"Oh?" I said. Did he say how he was going to do that? The last I heard, you folks had no craft to get off-world in."
Nay, no for the past 50 years have we, said Ciri, but it shows how irrational the separatists can be.
I nodded. Shipmaster Singh and Councillor Hamlin had briefed us on the so-called separatists of Maui Covenant. "The usual coalition of colonial jingoists and throwbacks," Singh had said. "Another reason we go slow and develop the world's trade potential before finishing the Farcaster. The World Web doesn't need these yahoos coming in prematurely. And groups like the separatists are another reason to keep the crew and construction workers the hell away from the groundlings." "Where is your skimmer?" I asked. The common was emptying quickly. Most of the bands had packed up their instruments for the night. Gaily costumed heaps lay snoring on the grass or cobblestones amid the litter and unlit lanterns. Only a few enclaves of merriment remained, groups dancing slowly to a lone guitar or singing drunkenly to themselves. I saw Mike Osho at once, a patchworked fool, his mask long gone, a girl on either arm. He was trying to teach the Hava Nagila to a rapt but inept circle of admirers. One of the troupe would stumble, and they would all fall down. Mike would flog them to their feet among general laughter, and they would start again, hopping clumsily to his basso profundo chant.
There it is, said Siri, and pointed to a short line of skimmers parked behind the common hall.
I nodded and waved to Mike, but he was too busy hanging on to his two ladies to notice me. Siri and I had crossed the square, and were in the shadows of the old building when the shout went up.
Shipman, turn around, you hegemony son of a bitch!
I froze, and then wheeled around with fists clenched, but no one was near me. 6 young men had descended the steps from the grandstand and were standing in a semicircle behind Mike. The man in front was tall, slim, and strikingly handsome. He was 25 or 26 years old, and his long blonde curls spilled down on a crimson silk suit that emphasized his physique. In his right hand he carried a meter-long sword that looked to be of tempered steel. Mike turned slowly. Even from a distance I could see his eyes sobering as he surveyed the situation. The women at his side and a couple of the young men in his group tittered as if something humorous had been said. Mike allowed the inebriated grin to stay on his face.
You address me, sir? He asked. I address you, you hegemony whore's son,
hissed the leader of the group. His handsome face was twisted in a sneer.
Bertel, whispered Siri, my cousin, Gresham's youngest son.
I nodded and stepped out of the shadows. Siri caught my arm.
That is twice you have referred unkindly to my mother, sir, slurred Mike. Has she or I offended you in some way? If so, 1,000 pardons.
Mike bowed so deeply that the bells on his cap almost brushed the ground. Members of his group applauded.
Your presence offends me, you hegemony bastard. You stink up our air with your fat carcass.
Mike's eyebrows rose comically. A young man near him in a fish costume waved his hand.
Come on, Bertel. He's just... Shut up, Ferric. It's this fat shithead I'm speaking to.
Shithead? Repeated Mike, eyebrows still raised. I've traveled 200 light years to be called a fat shithead? It hardly seems worth it. He pivoted gracefully, untangling himself from the women as he did so. I would have joined Mike, but Siri clung tightly to my arm, whispering unheard entreaties. When I was free, I saw that Mike was still smiling, still playing the fool. But his left hand was in his baggy shirt pocket.
Give him your blade, Gregg,
snapped Bertel. One of the younger men tossed a sword hilt first to Mike. Mike watched it arc by and clang loudly on the cobblestones. You can't be serious, said Mike in a soft voice that was suddenly quite sober. You cretinous cow-turd. Do you really think I'm going to play duel with you just because you get a hard-on for acting the hero for these yokels?
Pick up the sword, screamed Bertel, or by God, I'll carve you where you stand.
He took a quick step forward. The youth's face contorted with fury as he advanced. Fuck off, said Mike. In his left hand was the laser pen. No! I yelled and ran into the light. The pen was used by construction workers to scrawl marks on girders of whiskered alloy. Things happened very quickly then. Bertel took another step, and Mike flicked the green beam across him almost casually. The colonist let out a cry and leaped back. A smoking line of black was slashed diagonally across his silk shirt front. I hesitated. Mike had the setting as low as it could go. 2 of Bertel's friends started forward, and Mike swung the light across their shins. One dropped to his knees, cursing, and the other hopped away, holding his leg and hooting. A crowd had gathered. They laughed as Mike swept off his fool's cap in another bow. "I thank you," said Mike. "My mother thanks you." Siri's cousin strained against his rage. Froths of spittle spilled on his lips and chin. I pushed through the crowd and stepped between Mike and the tall colonist. "Hey, it's all right," I said. "We're leaving. We're going now." "God damn it, Marin, get out of the way," said Mike. "It's all right," I said as I turned to him. "I'm with a girl named Siri who has a—" Bertel stepped forward and lunged past me with his blade. I wrapped my left arm around his shoulder and flung him back. He tumbled heavily onto the grass. "Aw, shit," said Mike as he backed up several paces. He looked tired and a little disgusted as he sat down on a stone step. "Aw, damn," he said softly. There was a short line of crimson in one of the black patches on the left side of his Harlequin costume. As I watched, the narrow slit spilled over, and blood ran down Mike Osho's broad belly. "Oh, Jesus, Mike!" I tore a strip of fabric from my shirt and tried to staunch the flow. I could remember none of the first aid we'd been taught as midshipmen. I pawed at my wrist, but my comlog was not there. We had left them on the Los Angeles. "It's not so bad, Mike," I gasped. "It's just a little cut." The blood flowed down over my hand and wrist. "It will serve. It will serve," said Mike. His voice was held taut by a cord of pain. "Damn, a fucking sword. Do you believe it, Marin? Cut down in the prime of my prime by a piece of fucking cutlery out of a fucking one-penny opera. Oh, damn, that smarts." "Three-penny opera," I said, and changed hands. The rag was soaked. "You know what your fucking problem is, Marin? You're always sticking to your fucking 2 cents in." Oh. Mike's face went white and then gray. He lowered his chin to his chest and breathed deeply. "To hell with this kid. Let's go home, huh?" I looked over my shoulder. Bertel was slowly moving away with his friends. The rest of the crowd milled around in shock. "Call a doctor!" I screamed. "Get some medics up here!" 2 men ran down the street. There was no sign of Siri. "Wait a minute! Wait a minute!" said Mike in a stronger voice, as if he had forgotten something important. "Just a minute," he said, and died. Died. A real death. Brain death. His mouth opened obscenely, his eyes rolled back so only the whites showed, and a minute later the blood ceased pumping from the wound. For a few mad seconds I cursed the sky. I could see the LA moving across the fading starfield, and I knew that I could bring Mike back if I could get him there in a few minutes. The crowd backed away as I screamed and ranted at the stars. Eventually I turned to Bertel. "You," I said. The young man had stopped at the far end of the common. His face was ashen. He stared wordlessly. "You," I said again. I picked up the laser pen from where it had rolled, clicked the power to maximum, and walked to where Bertel and his friends stood waiting. Later, through the haze of screams and scorched flesh, I was dimly aware of Siri's skimmer setting down on the crowded square, of dust flying up all around, and of her voice commanding me to join her. We lifted away from the light and madness. The cool wind blew my sweat-soaked hair away from my neck.
"We will go to Feveron," said Siri. "Bertel was drunk. The Separatists are a small, violent group. There will be no reprisals. You will stay with me until the council holds the inquest."
"No," I said. "There, land there." I pointed to a spit of land not far from the city. Siri landed despite her protests. I glanced at the boulder to make sure the backpack was still there, and then climbed out of the skimmer. Siri slid across the seat and pulled my head down to hers.
"Marin, my love."
Her lips were warm and open, but I felt nothing. My body felt anesthetized. I stepped back and waved her away. She brushed her hair back and stared at me from green eyes filled with tears. Then the skimmer lifted, turned, and sped to the south in the early morning light. "Just a minute," I felt like calling. I sat on a rock and gripped my knees as several ragged sobs were torn up out of me. Then I stood and threw the laser pen into the surf below. I tugged out the backpack and dumped the contents on the ground. The hawking mat was gone. I sat back down, too drained to laugh or cry or walk away. The sun rose as I sat there. I was still sitting there 3 hours later when the large black skimmer from ship security sat down silently beside me.
Father, father, it is getting late.
I turned to see my son, Donal, standing behind me. He is wearing the blue and gold robe of the Hegemony Council. Oh, that's right, he's old.
Father, father, it is getting light.
I turned to see my son, Donal, standing behind me. Why am I doing that? He is wearing the blue and gold robe of the Hegemony Council. His bald scalp is flushed and beaded with sweat. Donal is only 43, but he seems much older to me.
Please, father, he says.
I nod and rise, brushing off the grass and dirt. We walk together to the front of the tomb. The crowd has pressed closer now. Gravel crunches under their feet, and as they shift restlessly.
Shall I enter with you, father?
Donal asks. I pause to look at this aging stranger who is my child. There is little of Ciri or me reflected in him. His face is friendly, florid, and tense with the excitement of the day. I can sense in him the open honesty which often takes the place of intelligence in some people. I cannot help but compare this balding puppy of a man to Haljan. Haljan of the dark curls and silences and sardonic smile. But Haljan is 33 years dead, cut down in a stupid battle which had nothing to do with him. No, I say, I'll go in myself, by myself. Thank you, Donal. He nods and steps back. The pennants snap above the heads of the straining crowd. I turn my attention to the tomb. The entrance is sealed with a palm lock. I have only to touch it. During the past few minutes I have developed a fantasy which will save me from both the growing sadness within and the external series of events which I have initiated. Ciri is not dead. In the last stages of her illness she had called together the doctors and the few technicians left in the colony, and they rebuilt for her one of the ancient hibernation chambers used in their seed ship 2 centuries earlier. Ciri is only sleeping. What is more, the year-long sleep has somehow restored her youth. When I wake her, she will be the Ciri I remember from our early days. We will walk out into the sunlight together, and when the Farcaster doors open, we shall be the first through.
Father?
Yes. I step forward and set my hand to the door of the crypt. There is a whisper of electric motors, and the white slab of stone slides back. I bow my head and enter Ciri's tomb.
Damn it, Merrin, secure that line before it knocks you overboard. Hurry!
I hurried. The wet rope was hard to coil, harder to tie off. Ciri shook her head in disgust and leaned over to tie a bowline knot with one hand. It was our 6th reunion. I had been 3 months too late for her birthday, but more than 5,000 other people had made it to the celebration. The CEO of the All Thing had wished her well in a 40-minute speech. A poet read his most recent verses to the love cycle sonnets. The Hegemony ambassador had presented her with a scroll and a new ship, a small submersible powered by the first fusion cells to be allowed on Maui Covenant. Ciri had 18 other ships. 12 belonged to her fleet of swift catamarans that plied their trade between the wandering archipelago and the home islands. Two were beautiful racing yachts that were used only twice a year to win the Founders' Regatta and the Covenant Criterium. The other four craft were ancient fishing boats, homely and awkward, well maintained, but little more than scows. Siri had 19 ships, but we were on a fishing boat, the Ginny Paul. For the past 8 days we had fished the shelf of the shallows. Sorry. For the past 8 days we had fished the shelf of the equatorial shallows, a crew of two, casting and pulling nets, wading knee-deep through stinking fish and crunching trilobites, wallowing over every wave, casting and pulling nets, keeping watch, and sleeping like exhausted children during our brief rest periods. I was not quite 23. I thought I was used to heavy labor aboard the LA, and it was my custom to put in an hour of exercise in the 1.3 G pod every second shift, but now my arms and back ached from the strain, and my hands were blistered between the calluses. Siri had just turned 70.
Merrin, go forward and reef the foresail. Do the same for the jib and then go below to see to the sandwiches. Plenty of mustard.
I nodded and went forward. For a day and a half we had been playing hide and seek with a storm, sailing before it when we could, turning about and accepting its punishment when we had to. At first it had been exciting, a welcome respite from the endless casting and pulling and mending. But after the first few hours the adrenaline rush faded to be replaced by constant nausea, fatigue, and a terrible tiredness. The seas did not relent. The waves grew to 6 meters and higher. The Ginny Paul wallowed like the broad-beamed matron she was. Everything was wet. My skin was soaked under 3 layers of rain gear. For Siri, it was a long-awaited vacation.
This is nothing,
She had said during the darkest hour of the night, as waves washed over the deck and smashed against the scarred plastic of the cockpit.
You should see it during simoon season.
The clouds still hung low and blended into gray waves in the distance, but the sea was down to a gentle 5-foot chop. I spread mustard across the roast beef sandwiches and poured steaming coffee into thick white mugs. It would have been easier to transport the coffee in 0G without spilling it than to get up the pitching shaft of the companionway. Siri accepted her depleted cup without commenting. We sat in silence for a bit, appreciating the food and the tongue-scalding warmth. I took the wheel when Siri went below to refill our mugs. The gray day was dimming almost imperceptibly into night.
Merrin,
She said, after handing me my mug and taking a seat on the long-cushioned bench which encircled the cockpit.
what will happen after they open the Farcaster?
I was surprised by the question. We had almost never talked about the time when Maui Covenant would join the hegemony. I glanced over at Siri and was struck by how ancient she suddenly seemed. Her face was a mosaic of seams and shadows. Her beautiful green eyes had sunken into wells of darkness, and her cheekbones were knife edges against brittle parchment. She kept her gray hair cut short now, and it stuck out in damp spikes. Her neck and wrists were tendoned cords emerging from a shapeless sweater. What do you mean? I asked.
What will happen after they open the Farcaster?
You know what the Council says, Siri. I spoke loudly because she was hard of hearing in one ear. It will open a new era of trade and technology for Maui Covenant. And you won't be restricted to one little world any longer. When you become citizens, everyone will be entitled to use the Farcaster doors.
Yes, said Siri. Her voice was weary. I have heard all of that, Merrin. But what will happen? Who will be the first through to us?
I shrugged. More diplomats, I suppose. Cultural contact specialists, anthropologists, ethnologists, marine biologists.
And then?
I paused. It was dark out. The sea was almost gentle. Our running lights glowed red and green against the night. I felt the same anxiety I had known 2 days earlier, when the wall of storm appeared on the horizon. I said, and then will come the missionaries, the petroleum geologists, the sea farmers, the developers. Ceres sipped at her coffee.
I would have thought your hegemony was far beyond a petroleum economy.
I laughed and locked the wheel in. Nobody gets beyond a petroleum economy. Not while there's petroleum there. We don't burn it, if that's what you mean. But it's still essential for the production of plastics, synthetics, food base, and keroids. Keroids? I'm not actually sure what that is. 200 billion people use a lot of plastic.
And Maui Covenant has oil.
Oh, yes, I said. There was no more laughter in me. There are billions of barrels reservoired under the equatorial shallows alone.
How will they get it, Merrin? Platforms?
Yeah, platforms, submersibles, subsea colonies with tailored workers brought in from Mare Infinitus.
And the motile isles? Asked Siri. They must return each year to the shallows to feed on the blue kelp there and to reproduce. What will become of the isles?
I shrugged again. I had drunk too much coffee, and it had left a bitter taste in my mouth. I don't know, I said. They haven't told the crew much. But back on our first trip out, Mike heard that they plan to develop as many of the isles as they can, so some will be protected.
Develop?
Siri's voice showed surprise for the first time.
How can they develop the isles? Even the first families must ask permission of the sea folk to build our treehouse retreats there.
I smiled at Siri's use of the local term for the dolphins. The Maui Covenant colonists were such children when it came to their damned dolphins. The plans are all set, I said. There are 128,573 motile isles big enough to build a dwelling on. Leases to those have long since been sold. The smaller isles will be broken up, I suppose. The home islands will be developed for recreation purposes.
Recreation purposes, echoed Siri. How many people from the hegemony will use the Farcaster to come here for recreation purposes?
At first, you mean? I asked. Just a few thousand the first year. As long as the only door is on Island 241, the trade center, it will be limited. Perhaps 50,000 the second year when First Sight gets its door. It'll be quite the luxury tour. Always is after a seed colony is first opened to the web.
And later?
After the 5-year probation, there will be thousands of doors, of course. I would imagine that there will be 20 or 30 million new residents coming through during the first year of full citizenship.
20 or 30 million,
said Siri. The light from the compass stand illuminated her lined face from below. There was still a beauty there, but there was no anger or shock. I had expected both. But you'll be citizens then yourself, I said, free to step anywhere in the world web. There will be 16 new worlds to choose from, probably more by then.
Yes,
said Siri, and set aside her empty mug. A fine rain streaked the glass around us. The crude radar screen set in its hand-carved frame showed the seas empty, the storm past.
Is it true, Merrin, that people in the hegemony have their homes on a dozen worlds? One house, I mean, with windows facing out on a dozen skies?
Sure, I said, but not many people. Only the rich can afford multi-world residences like that. Siri smiled and set her hand on my knee. The back of her hand was mottled and blue-veined.
But you are very rich, are you not, shipman?
I looked away. Not yet, I'm not.
Ah, but soon, Merrin, soon. How long for you, my love? Less than 2 weeks here, and then the voyage back to your hegemony. 5 months more of your time to bring the last components back. A few weeks to finish, and then you step home a rich man. Step 200 empty light years home. What a strange thought. But where was I? That is, how long? Less than a standard year.
10 months, I said. 306 standard days. 314 of yours. 918 shifts.
and then your exile will be over,
Yes.
and you will be 24 years old and very rich.
Yes.
I'm tired, Merrin. I want to sleep now.
We programmed the tiller, set the collision alarm, and went below. The wind had risen some, and the old vessel wallowed from wave crest to trough with every swell. We undressed in the dim light of the swinging lamp. I was first in the bunk and under the covers. It was the first time Siri and I had shared a sleep period. Remembering our last reunion and her shyness at the villa, I expected her to douse the light. Instead, she stood a minute, nude in the chill air, thin arms calmly at her sides. Time had claimed Siri, but not ravaged her. Gravity had done its inevitable work on her breasts and buttocks, but she was much thinner. I stared at the gaunt outlines of ribs and breastbone and remembered the 16-year-old girl with baby fat and skin like warm velvet. In the cold light of the swinging lamp, I stared at Siri's sagging flesh and remembered moonlight on budding breasts. Yet somehow, strangely, inexplicably, it was the same Siri who stood before me now.
Move over, Merrin.
She slipped into the bunk beside me. The sheets were cool against our skin, the rough blanket welcome. I turned off the light. The little ship swayed to the regular rhythm of the sea's breathing. I could hear the sympathetic creak of masts and rigging. In the morning we would be casting and pulling and mending, but now there was time to sleep. I began to doze to the sound of waves against wood.
Merrin,
Yes?
what would happen if the Separatists attacked the hegemony tourists or the new residents?
I thought the Separatists had all been carted off to the Isles.
They have been, but what if they resisted?
The hegemony would send in force troops who could kick the shit out of the Separatists.
What if the Farcaster itself were attacked, destroyed before it was operational?
Impossible.
Yes, I know, but what if it were?
Then the Los Angeles would return 9 months later with hegemony troops who would proceed to kick the shit out of the Separatists. And anyone else on Maui Covenant who got in their way.
9 months ship time, said Siri. 11 years of our time.
But inevitable either way, I said. Let's talk about something else.
All right,
Said Siri, but we did not speak. I listened to the creak and sigh of the ship. Siri had nestled in the hollow of my arm. Her head was on my shoulder, and her breathing was so deep and regular that I thought her to be asleep. I was almost asleep myself when her warm hand slid up my leg and lightly cupped me. I was startled even as I began to stir and stiffen. Siri whispered an answer to my unasked question.
No, Merrin, one is never really too old. At least not too old to want the warmth and closeness. You decide, my love. I will be content either way.
I decided. Toward the dawn, we slept. The tomb is empty. Donald, come in here! He bustles in, robes rustling in the hollow emptiness. The tomb is empty. There is no hibernation chamber. I did not truly expect there to be one, but neither is there sarcophagus or coffin. A bright bulb illuminates the white interior. What the hell is this, Donald? I thought this was Siri's tomb.
It is, father.
Where is she interred? Under the floor, for Christ's sake? Donald mops at his brow. I remember that it is his mother I am speaking of. I also remember that he has had almost 2 years to accustom himself to the idea of her death.
No one told you?
He asks. Told me what? The anger and confusion are already ebbing. I was rushed here from the dropship station and told I was to visit Siri's tomb before the Farcaster opening. What?
Mother was cremated as per her instructions. Her ashes were spread on the great South Sea from the highest platform of the family isle.
Then why this crypt? I watch what I say. Donal is sensitive. He mops his brow again and glances to the door. We are shielded from the view of the crowd, but we are far behind schedule. Already the other members of the council have had to hurry down the hill to join the dignitaries on the bandstand. My slow grief this day has been worse than bad timing. It has turned into bad theatre.
Mother left instructions. They were carried out.
He touches a panel on the inner wall, and it slides up to reveal a small niche containing a metal box. My name is on it. What is that? Donal shakes his head.
Personal items Mother left for you. Only Marguerite knew the details, and she died last winter without telling anyone.
All right, I say. Thank you. I'll be out in a moment. Donal glances at his chronometer.
The ceremony begins in 8 minutes. They will activate the Farcaster in 20 minutes.
I know, I say. I do know. Part of me knows precisely how much time is left. I'll be out in a moment. Donal hesitates and then departs. I close the door behind him with a touch of my palm. The metal box is surprisingly heavy. I set it on the stone floor and crouch beside it. A smaller palm lock gives me access. The lid cracks open, and I peer into the container. Well, I'll be damned, I say softly. I do not know what I expected. Artifacts, perhaps, nostalgic mementos of our 103 days together. Perhaps a pressed flower from some forgotten offering, or the French horn conch we dove for off Feveron. But there are no mementos, not as such. The box holds a small Steiner Ginn hand laser, one of the most powerful projection weapons ever made. The accumulator is attached by a power lead to a small fusion cell that Ciri must have cannibalized from her new submersible. Also attached to the fusion cell is an ancient comlog, an antique with a solid-state interior and a liquid crystal disk key. The charge indicator glows green. There are two other objects in the box. One is the translator medallion we had used so long ago. The final object makes me literally gape in surprise. Why, you little bitch, I say. Things fall into place. I cannot stop a smile. You dear, conniving little bitch. There, rolled carefully, power lead correctly attached, lies the hawking mat Mike Osho bought in Carvnell Marketplace for 30 marks. I leave the hawking mat there, disconnect the comlog, and lift it out. I sit cross-legged on the cold stone and thumb the disk key. The light in the crypt fades out, and suddenly Ciri is there before me. Oh, one sec. This is an actual important phone call. Give me a moment. Sorry about that. That one was actually important. It's okay. What are we looking at? Yes, the time I gave them is probably accurate. Okay. Where were we? Oh, there we are. They did not throw me off the ship when Mike died. They could have, but they did not. They did not leave me to the mercy of the provincial justice on Maui Covenant. They could have, but they chose not to. For 2 days I was held in security and questioned, once by Shipmaster Singh himself. Then they let me return to duty. For the 4 months of the long leap back I tortured myself with the memory of Mike's murder. I knew that in my clumsy way I had helped to murder him. I put in my shifts, dreamed my sweaty nightmares, and wondered if they would dismiss me when we reached the web. They could have told me, but they chose not to. They did not dismiss me. I was to have my normal leave in the web, but could take no off-ship R&R while in Maui Covenant's system. In addition, there was a written reprimand and temporary reduction in rank. That was what Mike's life had been worth, a reprimand and reduction in rank. I took my 3-week leave with the rest of the crew, but, unlike the others, I did not plan to return. I forecast to Esperance and made the classic shipman's mistake of trying to visit family. 2 days in the crowded residential bulb was enough, and I stepped to Lucis and took my pleasure in 3 days of whoring on the Rue des Chats, as in Cat Road. When my mood turned darker, I cast to Fuji and lost most of my ready marks betting on the bloody samurai fights there. Finally, I found myself farcasting to Home System Station and taking the 2-day pilgrim shuttle down to Hellas Basin. I had never been to Home System or Mars before, and I never planned to return, but the 10 days I spent there, alone and wandering the dusty, haunted corridors of the monastery, served to send me back to the ship. Back to Siri. Occasionally I would leave the red-stoned maze of the megalith and, clad only in skin suit and mask, stand on one of the uncounted thousands of stone balconies and stare skyward at the pale grey star which had once been old Earth. Sometimes then I thought of the brave and stupid idealists heading out into the great dark in their slow and leaking ships, carrying embryos and ideologies with equal faith and care. But most times I did not try to think. Most times I simply stood in the purple light and let Siri come to me. There in the Master's Rock, where perfect Satori had eluded so many much worthier pilgrims, I achieved it through the memory of a not quite 16-year-old woman-child's body lying next to mine while moonlight spilled from a Thomas Hawk's wings. When the Los Angeles spun back up to a quantum state, I went with her. 4 months later, I was content to pull my shift with the construction crew, plug into my usual stims, and sleep my R&R away. Then Singh came to me.
You're going down, he said.
You're going down, he said. I did not understand.
In the past 11 years, the groundlings have turned your screw-up with Osho into a goddamn legend, said Singh. There's an entire cultural mythos built around your little roll in the hay with that colonial girl.
Siri, I said.
Get your gear, said Singh. You'll spend your 3 weeks groundside. The ambassador's experts say you'll do the hegemony more good down there than up here. We'll see.
The world was waiting. Crowds were cheering. Siri was waving. We left the harbor in a yellow catamaran and sailed south-southeast, bound for the archipelago and her family isle.
Hello, Merrin.
Siri floats in the darkness of the tomb of her Siri floats in the darkness of her tomb. The holo is not perfect. A haziness mars the edges. But it is Siri.
Ciri, as I last saw her, grey hair shorn rather than cut, head high, face sharpened with shadows.
Hello, Merrin, my love.
Hello, Ciri, I say. The tomb door is closed.
I am sorry I cannot share our seventh reunion, Merrin. I looked forward to it.
Ciri pauses and looks down at her hands. The image flickers slightly as dust motes float through her form.
I had carefully planned what to say here, she goes on, how to say it. Arguments to be arguments to be pled, instructions to be given. But I know now how useless that would have been. Either I have said it already and you have heard, or there is nothing left to say, and silence would best suit the moment.
Ciri's voice had grown even more beautiful with age. There is a fullness and calmness there which can come only from knowing pain. Ciri moves her hands and they disappear beyond the border of the projection.
Merrin, my love, how strange our days apart and together have been. How beautifully absurd the myth that bound us. My days were but heartbeats to you. I hated you for that. You were the mirror that would not lie. If you could have seen your face at the beginning of each reunion, the least you could have done was to hide your shock. That, at least, you could have done for me. But through your clumsy naivete, there has always been what? Something, Merrin. There is something there that belies all the callousness and thoughtless egotism which you wear so well. A caring, perhaps, a respect for caring, if nothing else. Merrin, this diary has hundreds of entries, thousands, I fear. I have kept it since I was 13. By the time you see this, they will all have been erased, except the ones which follow. Adieu, my love. Adieu.
I shut off the comlog and sit in silence for a minute. The crowd sounds are barely audible through the thick walls of the tomb. I take a breath and thumb the disk key. Ciri appears. She is in her late 40s. I know immediately the day and place she recorded this image. I remember the cloak she wears, the eelstone pendant at her neck, and the strand of hair which has escaped her barrette and even now falls across her cheek. I remember everything about that day. It was the last day of our third reunion, and we were with friends on the heights above South Turn. Donal was 10, and we were trying to convince him to slide on the snowfield with us. He was crying. Ciri turned away from us even before the skimmer settled. When Magritte stepped out, we knew from Ciri's face that something had happened. The same face stares at me now. She brushes absently at the unruly strand of hair. Her eyes are red, but her voice is controlled.
Merrin, they killed our son today. Haljan was 21, and they killed him. You were so confused today, Merrin. How could such a mistake have happened? You kept repeating. You did not really know our son, but I could see the loss in your face when we heard. Merrin, it was not an accident. If nothing else survives, no other record, if you never understand why I allowed a sentimental myth to rule my life, let this be known. It was not an accident that killed Haljan. He was with the separatists when the council police arrived. Even then he could have escaped. We had prepared an alibi together. The police would have believed his story. He chose to stay. Today, Merrin, you were impressed with what I said to the crowd, the mob at the embassy. Know this, shipman. When I said, now is not the time to show your anger and your hatred, that is precisely what I meant. No more, no less. Today is not the time. But the day will come. It will surely come. The covenant was not taken lightly in those final days, Merrin. It is not taken lightly now. Those who have forgotten will be surprised when the day comes, but it will surely come.
The image fades to another, and in the split second of overlap, the face of a 26-year-old Siri appears superimposed on the older woman's features.
Merrin, I am pregnant. I'm so glad. You've been gone 5 weeks now, and I miss you. 10 years you'll be gone. More than that, Merrin. More than that. Merrin, why didn't you think to invite me to go with you? I could not have gone, but I would have loved it if you would have just invited me. But I'm pregnant, Merrin. The doctors say that it will be a boy. I will tell him about you, my love. Perhaps some day you and he will sail in the archipelago and listen to the songs of the sea folk as you and I have done these past few weeks. Perhaps you'll understand them by then. Merrin, I miss you. Please hurry back.
The holographic image shimmers and shifts. The 16-year-old girl is red-faced. Her long hair cascades over bare shoulders and a white nightgown. She speaks in a rush, racing tears.
Shipman Merrin Aspic, I'm sorry about your friend. I really am. But you left without even saying goodbye. I had such plans about how you would help us. How you and I... You didn't even say goodbye. I don't care what happens to you. I hope you go back to your stinking crowded hegemony hives and rot for all I care. In fact, Merrin Aspic, I wouldn't want to see you again even if they paid me. Goodbye.
She turns her back before the projection fades. It is dark in the tomb now, but the audio continues for a second. There's a soft chuckle, and Siri's voice, I cannot tell the age, comes one last time.
Adieu, Merrin.
Adieu. Adieu, I say, and thumb the disk key off.
Are you ready? You're not ready. I'm not ready. Let's go.
The crowd parts as I emerge blinking from the tomb. My poor timing has ruined the drama of the event, and now the smile on my face incites angry whispers. Loudspeakers carry the rhetoric of the official ceremony even to our hilltop.
Beginning a new era of cooperation,
Echoes the rich voice of the ambassador. I set the box on the grass and remove the hawking mat. The crowd presses forward to see as I unroll the carpet. The tapestry is faded, but the flight threads gleam like new copper. I sit in the center of the mat and slide the heavy box on behind me.
and more will follow until space and time will cease to be obstacles.
The crowd moves back as I tap the flight design and the hawking mat rises 4 meters into the air. Now I can see beyond the roof of the tomb. The islands are returning to form the equatorial archipelago. I can see them, hundreds of them, borne up out of the hungry south by gentle winds.
So it is with great pleasure that I close this circuit and welcome you, the colony of Maui Covenant, into the community of the hegemony of man.
The thin thread of the ceremonial calm laser pulses to the zenith. There is a pattering of applause, and the band begins playing. I squint skyward just in time to see a new star being born. Part of me knew to the microsecond what has just occurred. For a few microseconds the Farcaster had been functional. For a few microseconds time and space had ceased to be obstacles. Then the massive tidal pull of the artificial singularity triggered the thermite charge I had placed on the outer containment sphere. That tiny explosion had not been visible, but a second later the expanding Schwarzschild radius is eating its shell, swallowing 36,000 tons of fragile dodecahedron, and growing quickly to gobble several thousand kilometers of space around it. And that is visible, magnificently visible, as a miniature nova flares whitely in the clear blue sky. The band stops playing. People scream and run for cover. There is no reason to.
There is a burst of X-rays tunneling out as the Firecaster continues to collapse into itself, but not enough to cause harm through Maui Covenant's generous atmosphere. A second streak of plasma becomes visible as the Los Angeles puts more distance between itself and the rapidly decaying little black hole. The winds rise, and the seas are choppier. There will be strange tides tonight. I want to say something profound, but I can think of nothing. Besides, the crowd is in no mood to listen. I tell myself that I can hear some cheers mixed in with the screams and shouts. I tap at the flight designs, and the hawking mat speeds out over the cliff and above the harbor. A Thomas hawk lazing on midday thermals flaps in panic at my approach. "Let them come!" I shout at the fleeing hawk. "Let them come! I'll be 35 and not alone! Let them come if they dare!" I drop my fist and laugh. The wind is blowing my hair and cooling the sweat on my chest and arms. Cooler now, I take a sighting and set my course for the most distant of the isles. I look forward to meeting the others. Even more, I look forward to talking to the sea folk and telling them that it is time for the shark to come, at last, to the seas of Maui Covenant. Later, when the battles are won and the world is theirs, I will tell them about her. I will sing to them of Ciri. The cascade of light from the distant space battle continued. There was no sound except for the slide of wind across escarpments. The group sat close together, leaning forward and looking at the antique comlog as if expecting more. There was no more. The consul removed the microdisc and pocketed it. Saul Weintraub rubbed the back of his sleeping infant and spoke to the consul.
Surely you're not Marin Aspic?
No, said the consul. Marin Aspic died during the rebellion. Ciri's rebellion.
Then how did you come to possess this recording? Asked Father Hoyt.
Through the priest's mask of pain, it was visible that he had been moved.
This incredible recording.
He gave it to me, said the consul, a few weeks before he was killed in the Battle of the Archipelago. The consul looked at the uncomprehending faces before him. I'm their grandson, he said, Ciri's and Marin's. My father, the Donnell whom Aspic mentions, became the first Home Rule Councillor when Maui Covenant was admitted to the Protectorate. Later he was elected senator and served until his death. I was 9 years old that day on the hill near Ciri's tomb. I was 20, old enough to join the rebels and fight, when Aspic came to our isle at night, took me aside, and forbade me to join their band. Would you have fought? asked Braun Lamia. Oh, yes, and died, like a third of our menfolk and a fifth of our women, like all of the dolphins and many of the isles themselves, although the hegemony tried to keep as many of those intact as possible.
It is a moving document, said Saul Weintraub. But why are you here? Why the pilgrimage to the Shrike?
I am not finished, said the consul. Listen. My father was as weak as my grandmother had been strong. Damn it. My father was as weak as my grandmother had been strong. The hegemony did not wait 11 local years to return. The Force torch ships were in orbit before 5 years had elapsed. Father watched as the rebels' hastily constructed ships were swatted aside. He continued to defend the hegemony as they laid siege to our world. I remember when I was 15, watching with my family from the upper deck of our ancestral isle as a dozen other islands burned in the distance, the hegemony skimmers lighting the sea with their depth charges. In the morning, the waves were gray with the bodies of dead dolphins. My older sister Lyra went to fight with the rebels in those hopeless days after the Battle of the Archipelago. Eyewitnesses saw her die.
Her body was never recovered. My father never mentioned her name again. Within 3 years after the ceasefire and admission to the Protectorate, we original colonists were a minority on our own world. The Isles were tamed and sold to tourists, just as Marin had predicted to Siri. First Sight is a city of 11 million now, the condos and spires and EM cities extending around the entire island along the coast. First Sight Harbor remains as a quaint bazaar, with descendants of the first families selling crafts and overpriced art there. We lived on Tau Ceti Center for a while when Father was first elected senator, and I finished school there. I was the dutiful son, extolling the virtues of life in the web, studying the glorious history of the hegemony of man, and preparing for my own career in the diplomatic corps. And all the time, I waited. I returned to Maui Covenant briefly after graduation, working in the offices on the Central Administration Isle. Oh, sorry, that's a proper title. Working in the offices on Central Administration Isle. Part of my job was to visit the hundreds of drilling platforms going up in the shallows, to report on the rapidly multiplying undersea complexes, and to act as liaison with the development corporations coming in from TC Squared and Sol Draconi Septem. I did not enjoy the work, but I was efficient, and I smiled, and I waited. I courted and married a girl from one of the first families, from Siri's cousin Bertel's line, and after receiving a rare first on diplomatic corps examinations, I requested a post out of the web. Thus began our personal diaspora, Gresha's and mine. I was efficient. I was born to diplomacy. Within 5 standard years, I was an under-consul. Within 8, a consul in my own right. As long as I stayed in the outback, this was as far as I would rise. It was my choice. I worked for the hegemony. And I waited. At first, my role was to provide web ingenuity to help the colonists do what they do best, destroy truly indigenous life. It is no accident that in 6 centuries of interstellar expansion, the hegemony has encountered no species considered intelligent on the Drake-Turing-Chen index. On old Earth, it had long been accepted that if a species put mankind on its food chain menu, the species would be extinct before long. As the web expanded, if a species attempted serious competition with humanity's intellect, that species would be extinct before the first Farcaster opened in system. On Whirl, we stalked the elusive Zeppelin through their cloud towers. It is possible that they were not sapient by human or core standards, but they were beautiful. When they died, rippling in rainbow colors, their many-hued messages unseen, unheard by their fleeing herdmates, the beauty of their death agony was beyond words. We sold their photoreceptive skins to web corporations, their flesh to worlds like Heaven's Gate, and ground their bones to powder to sell as aphrodisiacs to the impotent and superstitious on a score of other colony worlds. On Garden, I was advisor to the arcology engineers who drained Grand Fen, ending the short reign of the Marsh Centaurs, who had ruled, and threatened hegemony progress, there. They tried to migrate in the end, but the North Reaches were far too dry, and when I visited the region decades later, when Garden entered the web, the desiccated remains of the centaurs still littered some of the distant reaches, like the husks of exotic plants from some more colorful era. On Hebron, I arrived just as the Jewish settlers were ending their long feud with the Seneshai Aluit, creatures as fragile as that world's waterless ecology. The Aluit were empathic, and it was our fear and greed which killed them. That and our unbreachable alienness. But on Hebron, it was not the death of the Aluit which turned my heart to stone, but my part in dooming the colonists themselves. On old Earth they had a word for what I was. Quisling. For, although Hebron was not my world, the settlers who had fled there had done so for reasons as clear as those of my ancestors who signed the Covenant of Life on the old Earth island of Maui.
But I was waiting, and in my waiting I acted, in all senses of the word. They trusted me. They grew to believe in my candid revelations of how wonderful it was to rejoin the community of mankind, to join the web. They insisted that only the one city might be open to foreigners. I smiled and agreed. And now New Jerusalem holds 60 millions, while the continent holds 10 million Jewish indigenes, dependent upon the web city for most of what they need. Another decade, perhaps less. I broke down a bit after Hebron was open to the web. I discovered alcohol, the blessed antithesis of flashback and wireheading. Gresha stayed with me in the hospital until I dried out. Oddly, for a Jewish world, the clinic was Catholic. I remember the rustle of robes in the halls at night. My breakdown had been very quiet and very far away. My career was not damaged. As full consul, I took my wife and son to Brescia. How delicate our role there! How Byzantine the fine line we walked! For decades, Colonel Cassad, forces of the Technocorps had been harassing the ouster swarms wherever they fled. Now, the forces that be in the Senate and AI Advisory Council had determined that some test had to be made of ouster might in the outback itself. Brescia was chosen. I admit the Brescians had been our surrogates for decades before I arrived. Their society was archaically and delightfully Prussian, militaristic to a fault, arrogant in their economic pretensions, xenophobic to the point of happily enlisting to wipe out the Auster menace. At first, a few Lend-Lease torch ships so that they could reach the swarms, plasma weapons, impact probes with tailored viruses. It was a slight miscalculation that I was still on Brescia when the ouster hordes arrived. A few months' difference. A military political analysis team should have been there in my place. It did not matter. Hegemony purposes were served. The resolve and rapid deployment capabilities of force were properly tested where no real harm was done to hegemony interests. Gresha died, of course, in the first bombardment. And Haljan, my 10-year-old son. He had been with me, had survived the war itself, only to die when some force idiot set off a booby trap or demolition charge too near the refugee barracks in Buckminster, the capital. I was not with him when he died. I was promoted after Brescia. I was given the most challenging and sensitive assignment ever relegated to someone of mere consular rank. Diplomat in charge of direct negotiations with the ousters themselves. First, I was cast to Tau Ceti Center for long conferences with Senator Gladstone's committee and some of the AI counselors. I met with Gladstone herself. The plan was very complicated. Essentially, the ousters had to be provoked into attacking, and the key to that provocation was the world of Hyperion. The ousters had been observing Hyperion since before the Battle of Brescia. Our intelligence suggested that they were obsessed with the time tombs and the Shrike. Their attack on the hegemony hospital ship carrying Colonel Cassad, among others, had been a miscalculation. Their ship captain had panicked when the hospital ship had been mistakenly identified as a military spin ship. Worse, from the ousters' point of view, was the fact that by setting their dropships down near the tombs themselves, the same commander had revealed their ability to defy the time tides. After the Shrike had decimated their commando teams, the torch ship captain returned to the swarm to be executed. But our intelligence suggested that the ouster miscalculation had not been a total disaster. Valuable information had been obtained about the Shrike, and their obsession with Hyperion had deepened. Gladstone explained to me how the hegemony planned to capitalize on that obsession. The essence of the plan was that the ousters had to be provoked into attacking the hegemony. The focus of that attack was to be Hyperion itself. I was made to understand that the resulting battle had more to do with internal web politics than with the ousters.
Elements of the Technocore had opposed Hyperion's entry into the hegemony for centuries. Gladstone explained that this was no longer in the interest of humanity, and that a forcible annexation of Hyperion, under the guise of defending the web itself, would allow more progressive AI coalitions in the core to gain power. This shift of the power balance in the core would benefit the Senate and the web in ways not fully explained to me. The ousters would be eradicated as a potential menace once and for all. A new era of hegemony glory would begin. Gladstone explained that I need not volunteer, that the mission would be fraught with dangers, both for my career and my life. I accepted anyway. The hegemony provided me with a private spacecraft. I asked only for one modification, the addition of an antique Steinway piano. For months I traveled alone under Hawking Drive. For more months I wandered in regions where the ouster swarms regularly migrated. Eventually my ship was sensed and seized. They accepted that I was a courier, and knew that I was a spy. They debated killing me, and did not. They debated negotiating with me, and eventually decided to do so. I will not try to describe the beauty of life in a swarm. Their zero-gravity globe cities and comet farms and thrust clusters, their micro-orbital forests and migrating rivers and the 10,000 colors and textures of life at Rendezvous Week. Suffice it to say that I believe the ousters have done what web humanity has not in the past millennia. Evolved. While we live in our derivative cultures, pale reflections of old Earth life, the ousters have explored new dimensions of aesthetics and ethics, and biosciences and art, and all the things that must change and grow to reflect the human soul. Barbarians, we call them, oh my gosh, it's because while is placed 2 times in a sentence within 2 words of each other. Sorry. Barbarians, we call them, while all the while we timidly cling to our web like Visigoths crouching in the ruins of Rome's faded glory, and proclaim ourselves civilized. Within 10 standard months I had told them my greatest secret, and they had told me theirs. I explained in all the detail I could what plans for extinction had been laid for them by Gladstone's people. I told them what little the web scientists understood of the anomaly of the time tombs, and revealed the Technocore's inexplicable fear of Hyperion. I described how Hyperion would be a trap for them if they dared attempt to occupy it, how every element of force would be brought to Hyperion's system to crush them. I revealed everything I knew and waited once again to die. Instead of killing me, they told me something. They showed me fat-line intercepts, tight beam recordings, and their own records from the date they fled Old Earth system, 4.5 centuries earlier. Their facts were terrible and simple. The big mistake of 38 had been no mistake. The death of Old Earth had been deliberate, planned by the elements of the Technocore and their human counterparts in the fledgling government of the hegemony. The Hegera had been planned in detail decades before the runaway black hole had, accidentally, been plunged into the heart of Old Earth. The world web, the all-thing, the hegemony of man, all of them had been built on the most vicious type of patricide. Now they were being maintained by a quiet and deliberate policy of fratricide, the murder of any species with even the slightest potential of being a competitor. And the ousters, the only other tribe of humanity free to wander between the stars, and the only group not dominated by the Technocore, was next on our list of extinction. I returned to the web. Over 30 years of web time had passed. Mina Gladstone was CEO. Ceres Rebellion was a romantic legend, a minor footnote in the history of the hegemony. I met with Gladstone. I told her many, but not all, of the things the ousters had revealed. I told her that they knew that any battle for Hyperion would be a trap, but that they were coming anyway. I told her that the ousters wanted me to become consul on Hyperion, so that I might be a double agent when war came. I did not tell her that they had promised to give me a device which would open the time tombs and allow the Shrike free rein. CEO Gladstone had long talks with me. Force intelligence agents had even longer talks with me, some lasting months. Technologies and drugs were used to confirm that I was telling the truth and keeping nothing back. The ousters also had been very good with technologies and drugs. I was telling the truth. I was also keeping something back. In the end, I was assigned to Hyperion. Gladstone offered to raise the world to protectorate status and me to an ambassadorship. I declined both offers, although I asked if I could keep my private spacecraft. I arrived on a regularly scheduled spin ship, and my own ship arrived several weeks later in the belly of a visiting torch ship. It was left in a parking orbit with the understanding that I could summon it and leave any time I wished. Alone on Hyperion, I waited. Years passed. I allowed my aide to govern the outback world while I drank at Cicero's and waited. The ousters contacted me through private fat line, and I took a 3 weeks' leave from the consulate, brought my ship down to an isolated place near the Sea of Grass, rendezvoused with their scout ship near the Oort Cloud, picked up their agent, a woman named Andil, and a trio of technicians, and dropped down north of the Bridle Range, a few kilometers from the tombs themselves. The ousters did not have farcasters. They spent their lives on the long marches between the stars, watching life in the web speed by like some film or holy, set at a frenzied speed. They were obsessed with time. The Technocore had given the hegemony the Farcaster and continued to maintain it. No human scientists or team of human scientists had come close to understanding it. The ousters tried. They failed. But even in their failures, they made inroads into understanding the manipulation of space-time. They understood the time tides, the anti-entropic fields surrounding the tombs. They could not generate such fields, but they could shield against them, and, theoretically, collapse them. The time tombs and all their contents would cease to age backward. The tombs would open. The Shrike would slip its tether, no longer connected to the vicinity of the tombs. Whatever else was inside would now be freed. The ousters believed that the time tombs were artifacts from their future, the Shrike a weapon of redemption awaiting the proper hand to seize it. The Shrike cult saw the monster as an avenging angel. The ousters saw it as a tool of human devising, sent back through time to deliver humanity from the Technocore. Andil and the technicians were there to calibrate and experiment. "You won't use it now?" I asked. We were standing in the shadow of the structure called the Sphinx.
"Not now," said Andil, "when the invasion is imminent."
"But you said it would take months for the device to work," I said, "for the tombs to open." Andil nodded. Her eyes were a dark green. She was very tall, and I could make out the subtle stripes of the powered exoskeleton on her skin suit.
"Perhaps a year or longer," she said. "The device causes the anti-entropic field to decay slowly. But once begun, the process is irrevocable. But we will not activate it until the 10 councils have decided that invasion of the web is necessary."
"There are doubts?" I said.
"Ethical debates," said Andil.
A few meters from us, the 3 technicians were covering the device with chameleon cloth and a coded containment field.
"An interstellar war will cause the deaths of millions, perhaps billions. Releasing the Shrike into the web, God knows how many times I've done that wrong. Releasing the Shrike into the web will have unforeseen consequences. As much as we need to strike at the core, strike is one line below it, it's fine. As much as we need to strike at the core, there are debates as to which is the best way."
I nodded and looked at the device and the Valley of the Tombs. "But once this is activated," I said, "there is no turning back. The Shrike will be released, and you will have to have won the war to control it." Andil smiled slightly.
"That is true."
I shot her then, and then her and the 3 technicians. Then I tossed Grandmother Siri's Steiner Gin laser far into the drift dunes, and sat on an empty flow foam crate and sobbed for several minutes. Then I walked over, used a technician's comlog to enter the containment field, threw off the chameleon cloth, and triggered the device. There was no immediate change. The air held the same rich, late winter light. The jade tomb glowed softly, while the Sphinx continued to stare down at nothing. The only sound was the rasp of sand across the crates and bodies. Only a glowing indicator on the ouster device showed that it was working. Had already worked. I walked slowly back to the ship, half expecting the Shrike to appear, half hoping that it would. I sat on the balcony of my ship for more than an hour, watching the shadows filling the valley and the sand covering the distant corpses. There was no Shrike, no thorn tree. After a while I played a Bach prelude on the Steinway, buttoned up the ship, and rose into space. I contacted the ouster ship and said that there had been an accident. The Shrike had taken the others. The device had been activated prematurely. Even in their confusion and panic, the ousters offered me refuge. I declined the offer and turned my ship toward the web. The ousters did not pursue. I used my Fatline transmitter to contact Gladstone and to tell her that the ouster agents had been eliminated. I told her that the invasion was very likely, that the trap would be sprung as planned. I did not tell her about the device. Gladstone congratulated me and called me home. I declined. I told her that I needed silence and solitude. I turned my ship toward the outback world nearest the Hyperion system, knowing that travel itself would eat time until the next act commenced. Later, when the Fatline call to pilgrimage came from Gladstone herself, I knew the role the ousters had planned for me in these final days. The ousters, or the Corps, or Gladstone, and her machinations. It no longer matters who consider themselves the master of events. Events no longer obey their masters. The world as we know it is ending, my friends, no matter what happens to us. As for me, I have no request to the Shrike. I bring no final words for it or the universe. I have returned because I must, because this is my fate. I've known what I must do since I was a child, returning alone to Ceres' tomb and swearing a vengeance on the hegemony. I've known what price I must pay, both in life and in history. But when the time comes to judge, to understand a betrayal which will spread like flame across the web, which will end worlds, I ask you not to think of me. My name was not even writ on water, as your lost poet's soul said, but to think of old Earth, dying for no reason, to think of the dolphins, their gray flesh drying and rotting in the sun, to see, as I have seen, the motile isles with no place to wander, their feeding grounds destroyed, the equatorial shallows scabbed with drilling platforms, the islands themselves burdened with shouting, trammeling tourists smelling of UV lotion and cannabis. Or better yet, think of none of that. Stand as I did after throwing the switch, a murderer, a betrayer, but still proud, feet firmly planted on Hyperion's shifting sand, head held high, fist raised against the sky, crying, "A plague on both your houses!" For you see, I remember my grandmother's dream. I remember the way it could have been. I remember Siri.
Are you the spy? Asked Father Hoyt. The ouster spy?
The consul rubbed his cheeks and said nothing. He looked tired, spent.
Yeah, said Martin Silenus. CEO Gladstone warned me when I was chosen for the pilgrimage. See, she said that there was a spy.
She told all of us, snapped Braun Lamia. She stared at the consul. Her gaze seemed sad.
Our friend is a spy, said Saul Weintraub, but not merely an ouster spy.
The baby had awakened. Weintraub lifted her to calm her crying.
He is what they call in the thrillers a double agent, a triple agent in this case, an agent to infinite regression. In truth, an agent of retribution.
The consul looked at the old scholar.
He's still a spy, said Silenus. Spies are executed, aren't they?
Colonel Cassad had the death wand in his hand. It was not aimed in anyone's direction.
Are you in touch with the ship? Are you in touch with your ship? He asked the consul.
Yes.
How?
Through Ceres Comlog. It was modified. Cassad nodded slightly.
And you've been in touch with the ousters via the ship's fatline transmitter?
Yes.
Making reports of the pilgrimage, on the pilgrimage as they expected?
Yes.
Have they replied?
No.
How can we believe him? Cried the poet. He's a fucking spy!
Shut up, Colonel Cassad said flatly, finally. His gaze never left the consul.
Did you attack Het Mastine?
No, said the consul, but when the Yggdrasil burned, I knew that something was wrong.
What do you mean?
Said Cassad. The consul cleared his throat. I've spent time with the Templar voices of the tree. Their connection to their tree ships is almost telepathic. Mastine's reaction was far too subdued. Either he wasn't what he said he was, or he had known that the ship was to be destroyed, and had severed contact with it. When I was on guard duty, I went below to confront him. He was gone. The cabin was as we found it, except for the fact that the Mobius box was in a neutral state. The Erg could have escaped. I secured it and went above.
You did not harm Het Mastine?
Cassad asked again. No.
I repeat, why the fuck should we believe you? Said Silenus.
The poet was drinking scotch from the last bottle he had brought along. The consul looked at the bottle as he answered. You have no reason to believe me. It doesn't matter. Colonel Cassad's long fingers idly tapped the dull casing of the death wand.
What will you do with your fatline comlink now?
The consul took a tired breath. Report when the time tomb's open, if I'm still alive then. Braun Lamia pointed at the antique comlog.
We could destroy it.
The consul shrugged.
It could be of use, said the colonel. We can eavesdrop on military and civilian transmissions made in the clear. If we have to, we can call the consul's ship.
No! Cried the consul. It was the first time he had shown emotion in many minutes. We can't turn back now.
I believe we have no intention of turning back, said Colonel Cassad.
He looked around at the pale faces. He looked around at pale faces. No one spoke for a moment.
There is a decision we have to make, said Saul Weintraub.
He rocked his infant and nodded in the direction of the consul. Martin Silenus had been resting his forehead on the mouth of the empty bottle of scotch. He looked up.
The penalty for treason is death.
He giggled.
We're all going to die within a few hours anyway. Why not make our last act an execution?
Father Hoyt grimaced as a spasm of pain gripped him. He touched his cracked lips with a trembling finger.
We're not a court.
Yes, said Colonel Cassad, we are.
The consul drew up his legs, rested his forearms on his knees, and laced his fingers. Decide then. There was no emotion in his voice. Braun Lamia had brought out her father's automatic pistol. Now she set it on the floor near where she sat. Her eyes darted from the consul to Cassad. We're talking treason here, she said. Treason toward what? None of us except maybe the colonel there is exactly a leading citizen. We've all been kicked around by forces beyond our control. Saul Weintraub spoke directly to the consul.
What you have ignored, my friend, is that if Mina Gladstone and elements of the Corps chose you for the ouster contact, they knew very well what you would do. Perhaps they could not have guessed that the ousters had the means by which to open the tombs, although with the AIs of the Corps one can never know. But they certainly knew that you would turn on both societies, both camps, which have injured your family. It is all part of some bizarre plan. You were no more an instrument of your own will than was, he held the baby up, this child.
The consul looked confused. He started to speak, shook his head instead.
That may be correct, said Colonel Fedman Kassad, but however they may try to use all of us as pawns, we must attempt to choose our own actions.
He glanced up at the wall where pulses of light from the distant space battle painted the plaster blood red.
Because of this war, thousands will die, perhaps millions. If the ousters or the Shrike gain access to the web's Farcaster system, billions of lives on hundreds of worlds are at risk.
The consul watched as Kassad raised the death wand.
This would be faster for all of us, said Kassad. The Shrike knows no mercy.
No one spoke. The consul seemed to be staring at something at a great distance. Kassad pressed on the safety and set the wand back in his belt.
We've come this far, he said. We will go the rest of the way together.
Braun Lamia put away her father's pistol, rose, crossed the small space, knelt next to the consul, and put her arms around him. Startled, the consul raised one arm. Light danced on the wall behind them. A moment later, Saul Weintraub came close and hugged them both with one arm around their shoulders. The baby wriggled in pleasure at the sudden warmth of bodies. The consul smelled the talc and newborn scent of her.
I was wrong, said the consul. I will make a request of the Shrike. I will ask for her.
He gently touched Rachel's head where the small skull curved in to neck. Martin Silenus made a noise which began as a laugh and died as a sob.
Our last requests, he said. Does the Muse grant requests? I have no request. I want only for the poem to be finished.
Father Hoyt turned toward the poet.
Is it so important?
Oh, yes, 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 yes! Gasped Silenus.
He dropped the empty Scotch bottle, reached into his bag, and lifted out a handful of flimsies, holding them high as if offering them to the group.
Do you want to read it? Do you want me to read it to you? It's flowing again. Read the old parts. Read the cantos I wrote 3 centuries ago and never published. It's all here. We're all here. My name, yours, this trip. Don't you see? I'm not creating a poem. I'm creating the future.
He let the flimsies fall, raised the empty bottle, frowned, and held it like a chalice.
I'm creating the future, he repeated without looking up. But it's the past which must be changed. One instant, one decision.
Martin Silenus raised his face. His eyes were red.
The thing that is going to kill us tomorrow. My muse, our maker, our unmaker. It's traveled back through time. Well, let it. This time, let it take me and leave Billy alone. Let it take me and let the poem end there, unfinished for all time.
He raised the bottle higher, closed his eyes, and threw it against the far wall. Glass shards reflected orange light from the silent explosions. Colonel Kassad stepped closer and laid long fingers on the poet's shoulder. For a few seconds the room seemed warmed by the mere fact of human contact. Father Father Lenar Hoyt stepped away from the wall where he had been leaning, raised his right hand with thumb and little finger touching, 3 fingers raised, the gesture somehow including himself as well as those before him, and said softly, Ego te absolvo. Wind scraped at the outer walls and whistled around the gargoyles and balconies. Light from a battle 100 million kilometers away painted the group in blood hues. Colonel Kassad walked to the doorway. The group moved apart. Let's try to get some sleep, said Braun Lamia. Later, alone in his bedroll, listening to the wind shriek and howl, the consul set his cheek against his pack and pulled the rough blanket higher. It had been years since he had been able to fall asleep easily. The consul set his curled fist against his cheek, closed his eyes, and slept. Oh, sorry, I didn't notice your message before, Mulosh Bult. Hi. Hello, thank you for tuning in. Epilogue. The consul awoke to the sound of a balalaika being played so softly that at first he thought it was the undercurrent of his dream. The consul rose, shivered in the cold air, wrapped his blanket around him, and went out onto the long balcony. It was not yet dawn. The skies still burned with the light of battle. I'm sorry, said Lenar Hoyt, looking up from his instrument. The priest was huddled deep in his cape. It's all right, said the consul. I was ready to awaken. It was true. He could not remember feeling more rested. Please continue, he said. The notes were sharp and clear, but barely audible above the wind noise. It was as if Hoyt was playing a duet with the cold wind from the peaks above. The consul found the clarity almost painful. Braun Lamia and Colonel Kassad came out. A minute later, Saul Weintraub joined them. Rachel twisted in his arms, reaching toward the night sky as if she could grasp the bright blossoms there. Hoyt played. The wind was rising in the hour before dawn, and the gargoyles and escarpments acted like reeds to the keep's cold bassoon. Martin Silenus emerged, holding his head.
No fucking respect for a hangover,
he said. He leaned on the broad railing.
If I barf from this height, it'll be half an hour before the vomitus lands.
Father Hoyt did not look up. His fingers flew across the strings of the small instrument. The northwest wind grew stronger and colder, and the balalaika played counterpart, its notes warm and alive. The consul and the others huddled in blankets and capes as the breeze grew to a torrent, and the unnamed music kept pace with it. It was the strangest and most beautiful symphony the consul had ever heard. The wind gusted, roared, peaked, and died. Hoyt ended his tune. Braun Lamia looked around. It's almost dawn.
We have another hour, said Colonel Kassad.
Lamia shrugged.
Why wait?
Why indeed,
said Saul Weintraub. He looked to the east, where the only hint of sunrise was the faintest of palings in constellations there.
It looks like a good day is coming.
Let's get ready, said Hoyt. Do we need our luggage?
The group looked at one another. No, I think not, said the consul. The colonel will bring the comlog with the fat line communicator. Bring anything necessary for your audience with the Shrike. We'll leave the rest of the stuff here. All right, said Braun Lamia, turning back from the dark doorway, gesturing toward the others. Let's do it. There were 661 steps from the northeast portal of the keep to the moor below. There were no railings. The group descended carefully, watching their step in the insecure light. Once onto the valley floor, they looked back at the outcrop of stone above. Kronos Keep looked like part of the mountain, its balconies and external stairways mere slashes in the rock. Occasionally, a brighter explosion would illuminate a window or throw a gargoyle shadow, but except for those instances, it was as if the keep had vanished behind them. They crossed the low hills below the keep, staying on grass and avoiding the sharp shrubs which extended thorns like claws. In 10 minutes they had crossed to sand and were descending the low dunes toward the valley. Braun Lamia led the group. She wore her finest cape and a red silk suit with black trim. Oh shoot, I meant to do a quick change here. Give me a sec. Which one was it? Was it this one? Nope. This one? Nope. Give me a sec. It's one of the alt covers. I have to find it again. Ah, geez, where is this thing? It's probably the one in line that I skipped over because I'm a goober. Nope, it wasn't that one. There it is! Booyah! Sorry about that. I hope you all didn't see all 200 of those covers, but okay. Actually, it's closer to 10. But that's like 200 if you add an extra 0 and a 2. Where were we? Yes. Braun Lamia led the group. She wore her finest cape and a red silk suit with black trim. Her comlog gleamed on her wrist. Colonel Kassad came next. He was in full battle armor, camouflage polymer not yet activated, so the suit looked matte black, absorbing even the light from above. Kassad carried a standard issue Force assault rifle. His visor gleamed like a black mirror. Father Hoyt wore his black cape, black suit, and clerical collar. The balalaika was cradled in his arms like a child. He continued to set his feet carefully, as if each step caused pain. The consul followed. He was dressed in his diplomatic best, starched blouse, formal black trousers and demi-jacket, velvet cape, and the gold tricorn he had worn the first day on the tree ship. He had to keep a grip on the hat against the wind that had come up again, hurling grains of sand in his face and sliding along the dune tops like a serpent. Martin Silenus followed close behind in his coat of wind-rippled fur. Saul Weintraub brought up the rear. Rachel rode in the infant carrier, nestled under the cape and coat against her father's chest. Weintraub was singing a low tune to her, the notes lost in the breeze. 40 minutes out, they had come even with the dead city. Marble and granite gleamed in the violet light. The peaks glowed behind them, the keep indistinguishable from the other mountainsides. The group crossed a sandy vale, climbed a low dune, and suddenly the head of the Valley of the Time Tombs was visible for the first time. The consul could make out the thrust of the Sphinx's wings and a glow of jade. A rumble and crash from far behind them made the consul turn, startled, his heart pounding. "Is it beginning?" asked Lamia. "The bombardment?"
No, look,
said Kassad. He pointed to a point above the mountain. Peaks where blackness obliterated the stars. Lightning exploded along that false horizon, illuminating ice fields and glaciers.
only a storm,
he said. They resumed their trek across vermilion sands. The consul found himself straining to make out the shape of a figure near the tombs or at the head of the valley. He was certain beyond all certainty that something awaited them there, that it awaited. "Look at that," said Braun Lamia, her whisper almost lost in the wind. The time tombs were glowing. What the consul had first taken to be light reflected from above was not.
Each tomb glowed a different hue, and each was clearly visible now, the glow brightening, the tombs receding far back into the darkness of the valley. The air smelled of ozone. "Is that a common phenomenon?" asked Father Hoyt, his voice thin.
The consul shook his head. "I've never heard of it."
It has never been reported. It had never been reported at the time Rachel came to study the tombs," said Saul Weintraub.
He began to hum the low tune as the group started forward again through the shifting sands. They paused at the head of the valley. Soft dunes gave way to rock and ink-black shadows in the swale which led down to the glowing tombs. No one led the way. No one spoke. The consul felt his heart beating wildly against his ribs. Worse than fear or knowledge of what lay below was the blackness of spirit which seemed to have come into him on the wind, chilling him and making him want to run screaming toward the hills from which they had come. The consul turned to Saul Weintraub. "What's that tune you're singing to Rachel?" The scholar forced a grin and scratched his short beard.
"It's from an ancient flat film, pre-Hegira. Hell, it's pre-everything."
"Let's hear it," said Braun Lamia, understanding what the consul was doing. Her face was very pale. Weintraub sang it, his voice thin and barely audible at first. But the tune was forceful and oddly compelling. Father Hoyt uncradled the balalaika and played along, the notes gaining confidence. Braun Lamia laughed. Martin Silenus said in awe,
"My God, I used to sing this in my childhood. It's ancient."
But who is the wizard?
asked Colonel Cassad, the amplified voice through his helmet oddly amusing in this context. And what is Oz? asked Lamia. And just who is off to see this wizard? asked the consul, feeling the black panic in him fade ever so slightly. Saul Weintraub paused and tried to answer their questions, explaining the plot of a flat film which had been dust for centuries. Never mind, said Braun Lamia. You can tell us later. Just sing it again. Behind them, the darkness had engulfed the mountains as the storm swept down and across the moors toward them. The sky continued to bleed light, but now the eastern horizon had paled slightly more than the rest. The dead city glowed to their left like stone teeth. Braun Lamia took the lead again. Saul Weintraub sang more loudly, Rachel wriggling in delight. Lenar Hoyt threw back his cape so as to better play the balalaika. Martin Silenus threw an empty bottle far out onto the sands and sang along, his deep voice surprisingly strong and pleasant above the wind. Fedman Cassad pushed up his visor, shouldered his weapon, and joined in the chorus. The consul started to sing, thought about the absurd lyrics, laughed aloud, and started again. Just where the darkness began, the trail broadened. The consul moved to his right, Cassad joining him, Saul Weintraub filling the gap, so that instead of a single-file procession, the 6 adults were walking abreast. Braun Lamia took Silenus's hand in hers, joined hands with Saul on the other side. Still singing loudly, not looking back, matching stride for stride, they descended into the valley. Follow, 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 follow the yellow brick road. Oh, sorry. We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. Best ending to a book. I'm sorry. Especially when it's right before the sequel. It is... c'est magnifique. It is a work of art. It is absolutely the best. I'm tearing up and laughing myself half to death. So good. So good. Dan Simmons is a champ. A professional. He's good at what he do. Oh yeah, it is. It's like the thing that I think I love most about
the first book, Hyperion, is that it is all cool, wild revelations and just kind of short story vignettes to sort of help build the world. Which isn't to say that any of the others are bad. They're not, but like it just manages to nail this sense of wonder and weirdness and cool and everything else. It can be anything, and it keeps turning into anything it wants to be because it's different people's perspectives, different people's stories, different walks of life in this grand universe that everyone's in. It's just so good. The second book is a bit more actiony. Um, the Endymion books are, I guess, closer to the Fall of Hyperion in pacing, kind of. But it's been a while since I've read them, and B, they're sort of hard to describe. There's a lot that goes on in those. Some of which is very strange, and some of which is like, oh, that's what they were doing. Where? And some of it's very depressing, and some of it is not depressing. It's hopeful and optimistic. It's depressing. It's a whole lot of things. It's about as human. The whole series is like kind of this perfect reflection of idealized humanity, kind of, all our foibles, all our hopes, all our dreams, everything we want to be, everything we can be, and everything we actually wind up being, which is usually a bit of a disappointment. But also that we could possibly be better and do better and be destined for great things. It's just phenomenal. It's just that good. With that, I'm going to call it. Next week, we'll start the Fall of Hyperion, which is going to be a bit of a change of pace. I'm going to have to speak in an entire accent like half the book, and that's going to be fun. Actually, strictly speaking, I should do it entirely in that voice. That's going to be hard. I'm going to have to remember to do that. Yes, I basically agree. Partly, yeah. There's still some big revelations, but it's like you kind of know the destination already, sort of, and it's kind of all about getting there, I guess. And yes, the antagonists are quite interesting indeed. Also, some of the protagonists, or at least the things protecting the protagonists, the forces that be protecting the protagonists, is kind of well, that's something different. And yet, it's all surrounded by familiar faces. Suffice it to say, though, it does tie in quite well. I think there's still kind of some holes left over. I can't remember any of them off the top of my head. I remember thinking that at least at the end. I was like, how does this explain all these things? And it kind of doesn't. There is another short story that I'll have to read after I do that. I've got it here somewhere. I can't remember its title offhand, but it's quite good. And that's after the two Endymion books, the Endymion and the Rise of Endymion. So we'll get to those. So basic game plan is we will get cracking on Fall of Hyperion next week. That'll take us probably about the same amount of time. Actually, probably another week or two to get through. It's longish. It's a little longer than Hyperion. The Fall of Hyperion is. After that, probably be doing Destination Void by Frank Herbert, followed by the Three Body Problem, because those have been requested. Hopefully by the time I'm done those, I will have caught up on my reading and rereading of things people want read. I need to really write down a list of those things. I should really, really do that.
Mostly I've been trying to keep it in memory, and it is not always working because getting old sucks. I know one of them was Old Man's War by Scalzi. I know one of them was Carrion Comfort by, I'm writing the list right now, you're hearing it live, by Dan Simmons. Someone wanted Ilium and Olympos. I know how to type. Also by Dan Simmons. We're going to have a lot of Dan Simmons on this stream. Dan Simmons. Unfortunately, I'm basically out of Peter Watts to read because I've read on stream practically every published book he's made, barring future books and what is it called? It's the Crisis 2 tie-in novel. Crisis... Yes, the video game, yes. What is it called? Crisis Legion. Which is actually pretty good because it's Peter Watts. Also, some of his short stories. I haven't read his short stories, so I'll basically be limited to doing like blog posts worthy of note. Some of them are fairly insightful. He has a published book of a few of them that were curated. But we'll see. Definitely his short stories we'll get through at some point. Other than that, we got a whole bunch of Cory Doctorow to read. I'm a fan. We've got a lot more Gregg Egan. I'm also probably going to wind up reading some Philip K. Dick because I love Dick. Take that how thou wilt. I'm secure in my manhood and my sexuality. I don't care. I'm secure. Philip K. Dick's great. You will basically never read anything quite so paranoid. See, I thought about reading that one aloud, but I think I'm going to skip reading that one aloud. I have it, I've read it, and my biggest regret with it is, and it is called The Redemption of Time, I believe. Yeah, The Redemption of Time. It's not bad, don't get me wrong. It's official fan fiction, but it reads pretty much like fan fiction. It's okay. I am also, for the Three Body Problem series, probably going, at this point, I am skipping reading, as I've mentioned before, Ball Lightning, which technically takes place in the same universe before the events of Three Body Problem, and technically has allusions to what will wind up happening in Three Body Problem, but there's so friggin' little of it that honestly, I don't think it's worth it. It's also not my favorite book of Cixin Liu's that I've read. It's okay. It's not bad. It's just like Three Body Problem, Dark Forest, and Death's End are like, wow, you know. Well, okay. Specifically, Dark Forest and Death's End are like wow territory. What was the other one? There's another one that somebody wanted me to read, and I can't remember what it was. I might be thinking of... Oh, the one somebody wanted me to read here. Who was it? Quantum Thief trilogy. Quantum Thief. Quantum Thief trilogy. Also, The Jesus Incident, which is the one people actually wanted me to read. Somebody wanted me to read, not Destination Void, but I have to read Destination Void to get the lead in for The Jesus Incident. Dense, and that's by Frank Herbert and what's his name? Bill Ransom, that's his name. And Bill Ransom.
I do want to get around to reading some Banks. I'll probably just do the Culture series, starting chronologically from the top. So it'll be Consider Phlebas. Consider Phlebas plus Culture. Banks. So we're already at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then however long the Culture series is, I can't name them all off the top of my head. It's a lot. It's at least 10 novels, and we will get to them. We're not going to all do them in a row. Sorry. Fortunately, they all stand on their own extremely well. Maybe the best job of having a united universe with stories that stand on their own well that I have ever read, barring possibly C.J. Sherry's work for the Alliance Union universe, because those, other than the ones that are direct sequels to each other, which you kind of have to read the preceding book for, um, which really only applies, come to think of it, to the Heavy Time and Fireburner couplet and Cytine and Regenesis. Everything else you can kind of read on its own, but there's context that's relevant from some of the others, specifically Down Below Station. Down Below Station will probably be the next one I read because it does provide the context for practically everything else that happens after Heavy Time and Fireburner. Hellburner, not Fireburner. Sorry. I'm losing my... Oh, someone ages ago, I think, requested that I do Operation Hail Mary, or Project Hail Mary, by Andy Weir. So I need to add that to the list. I was thinking about that the other day. Which is pretty good for what it's worth. Andy Weir... I like Andy Weir. I respect Andy Weir. I don't think he's quite up to the same literary standard. That's a really terrible thing to say. As some of the other people I've read on stream, C.J. Sherry, some of the other sci-fi greats, but he does friggin' try. And he's not bad. And he does write a ripping yarn. He makes a fun story. He's kind of a case of, I think if you let this man cook a little while longer, he's going to be making some of the better sci-fi that's being made ever. And he's already made some great stuff. Very catchy. I mean, The Martian is just a fun read. Artemis is a fun read. Project Hail Mary is also pretty good. I think it also hilariously predates by years. What is it by Kim Stanley Robinson, the one that got a lot of buzz a year or two ago? Ministry of the Future. Which I have also read and will not be reading on stream because half of it is almost a good story and then the other half is kind of really, really dry. It is not Kim Stanley Robinson's best work, in my opinion. I'd probably push people towards the red, blue, green Mars trilogy. But even then, I'd probably be like, maybe read Foundation by Asimov instead. And that's not to be mean to Kim Stanley Robinson. He's good. He's accomplished. He's creditable. This is all total personal opinion territory. So objective merits are not here. You're not going to find them. I'm not saying they're bad. They're good because they're like, oh, let's cover this broad swath of time as we try to terraform Mars. And I think they're worthwhile. But Ministry for the Future is like, oh, we're really fucking the planet. I'm like, yes, we are. Well, here's all sorts of things. And I'm like, that's cool. How about things to do something about it? It's like, well, if you have a single person who has like godlike decision-making power and none of the resources to enforce it, you could get absolutely nothing done. And I'm like, yes, you're absolutely correct. Thank you for the astute observation of the obvious. But if you gave them the ability to make things happen, and I'm like, yeah, okay, sure. And then the other half of the book is basically, hey, here's all these things you already knew. And I'm like, yes, I already knew those. Yes, the Earth is desperately fucked, and we have done a good job of fucking it. But there's things we can do to fix it, and proceeds to show, quote, solutions or ways to fix it that nobody's going to adopt and aren't going to fix the problem because he's too optimistic. So my sass over on Kim Stanley Robinson. I can't even go into great detail on just how fucked we are civilizationally, because it's A, too depressing and I don't have the energy, and B, I will be ranting and screaming like an old man, okay, like the old man I am about it. Anyway, I should really just shut up. Yeah, there's a lot to read. Wednesdays are going to be where I'm doing like anything that I'm not fitting in for Fridays. So Wednesdays is not. I'm going to try and avoid doing sci-fi for Wednesdays. Um, Only because 90+% of what I've done has been science fiction related on this, and I want to at least show that I have more books on my wall than that. Not many more books than that, but a lot, some. They're out there. Like I want to read the Warded Man series by Peter V. Brett, or the Demon Cycle, I think it's called. I don't remember what the series is called. I also want to do this reading of Beowulf, this translation of Beowulf by Maria Davana Headley, which is a lot of fun to read. So we'll fit in some fantasy. I've got some biographies I could do in a pinch. Reminds me, I've got to actually start this one on the Tokyo trials, which is going to probably prove to be very depressing. Just kind of how things turned out, or why things turned out the way they did in the wake of World War II for Japan. It's kind of revealing. Um, I lost my train of thought.